Hi, and welcome to the replay of this critically important webinar. Now, if you're using Google Analytics right now, you have a critical change to make before February 28th. So if you're watching this, you're just in time. Now, you may have received multiple emails from Google over the past month, letting you know that they will automatically upgrade you. Now, for the people who have received this email, you do not want to do this. Truth be told, most businesses don't even know that this change is happening so soon. So if you're using Google Analytics right now, it's critically important that you watch this entire webinar now. If you have clients who use Google Analytics, this could be a huge opportunity for you to help clean up a colossal mess before it ever happens. More on that in just a minute. By the way, my name's Kurt Molly, and if we have not met yet, I've been marketing online for close to 20 years now. Our full-service marketing agency just celebrated our 19th year in business, and we've helped train thousands of business owners, online marketers, and agency owners over the last decade, all about paid and traditional media. Now, this video and replay is so important, it's required viewing for any of our agency clients, all of our agency clients, students, and everyone who's involved in our online communities. All of these changes are happening because the internet is growing up and Google's making some massive changes to the way that it tracks and reports activities online. Now, first off, Google will soon be phasing out the tracking cookie. This is actually the main way that many marketers used to track and report on what website visitors would be doing on their website once they basically clicked on an ad and, well, landed on your website. Now, this is going to be a bigger change in the whole iOS debacle that you may remember a few years ago when Apple all but eliminated tracking across their platform to, protect people's privacy. But today, we're going to be talking about Google Analytics and the updated GA4 and the two massive changes that are about ready to take place. Now, what you may be using right now is called Google Universal Analytics. Well, that is to stop working, and this new upgrade is called GA4. On February 28th of this year, Google will automatically be converting your Google Analytics account into a GA4 account. I cannot stress this enough. You do not want this to happen. Now, I will tell you this, Google has a high-end tier, people who pay over $150,000 a year to access Google Analytics. They're not forcing those people to upgrade, but they're forcing everyone on the free accounts to upgrade. Again, you don't want to do this. This is like your mom cleaning your room for you. Be careful what you wish for. Be careful what's going to be thrown out. You don't know where stuff's going to be. And honestly, it's just going to make a bigger mess for you. Then on July 1st of this year, Google Universal Analytics, which you're using right now, will stop reporting. It stops. It will no longer work. So if you go in July 5th and you're curious, hey, what happened so far for the month of July? There will be no data there. You see, Facebook has their own tracking, and Facebook reports on what happens in their platform. So if someone clicks on their ad, they report that. If they land on your site, they can report that. Now, Facebook can track goals, for example, like if you have leads and purchases, but that's about it. Now, the same goes for YouTube ads, TikTok ads, Twitter ads, any other platform or organic marketing. The critical reason why anyone marketing online needs to use GA4 is so you can tell what's happening once someone hits your website. Like, what do the visitors do? For example, once someone lands on your website, how long are they reading the page? Do they scroll? Do they sit there? Are they clicking on buttons? What are your potential customers doing once they get to your website? The Facebook platform doesn't track this for you. So if you want to improve your landing page or your offers, or even improve the customer experience on your website, you'll need to have GA4 in place. Now, GA4 will be your one centralized place to look at the data from each of the ad platforms or however you choose to market. It'll even track offline activities when you know what you're doing. It's pretty easy. Now, what's going to happen is you want to be able to use GA4 to make educated decisions on what to do next and what to fix and improve in your marketing. If you're watching this video, chances are you're going to be in one of three camps. Either number one, you are brand new to online marketing and tracking. Well, if you're just getting started with online marketing and you have not yet started using Google Analytics, you are in the right place at the right time. We have lots of free tools that can help you. Going forward, you're going to rely on this critical information that GA4 will be providing for you. Number two, intermediate. Maybe you have Google Analytics installed and you use it from time to time, but you haven't really mastered how and why to use it. Hands down, this presentation will help you become a better all-around marketer with our free tools and Mercer's team to support you whenever you need it. Now, getting involved right now and taking action now will save you a lot of heartache and a lot of lost time and wasted effort when you take action right now and watch this presentation. Now, if you're an expert marketer, you've been doing this for a while, or maybe you own an agency, I dare to say this may be the most critical webinar that you view all year. Mercer and his team have some very specific insight that I believe will be a game changer for your online marketing. Now, there are some new and some free tools and support options that we can help you weather this upcoming storm and thrive from these upcoming changes. So regardless of your marketing experience or how long you've been marketing online, these changes are about ready to take place, regardless if you are ready or not. So watch this entire video, take action on all the parts that are most important to you and your business. Below, you're going to see a timestamp summary of the most important talking points of this webinar and where to find the most critical updates that pertain to your business. Again, I can't stress enough, please forward this link to this video to anyone you know who is marketing online. Google's not doing a very good job about getting the word out, and it's going to affect every business owner who uses Google Analytics. Again, most businesses are just absolutely unaware of these changes, and time is running out to get in front of this versus having Google create even a bigger mess for you for this upcoming automatic switch. So let's go ahead and dive right on into this critically important presentation. There's some massive changes happening with Google tracking, and that is exactly why we have Mr. Chris Mercer here, aka Mercer, that we all call him. Now, one of the things that we've leaned on Mercer for years, anytime that we've had a problem with measurement or tracking, we raise our hand, we call Mercer. Anytime our clients have any problems with tracking or measurement, we raise our hand, we call Mercer. Now, some people will ask, well, are we getting exact tracking for everything everybody does, like video views and engagement? Are we seeing the exact the tracking path? Well, what Mercer will talk about a lot more is the customer journey and measurement. But the most critical thing is this. You just have to figure out a way to measure your traffic that works for you and do it consistently. The thing I love about Mercer, if you're not exposed to Mercer yet, is he makes really complicated things easy to understand, easy to implement, easy to get started, easy to start seeing results. You just got to put in the work to do so. So what I want to be able to do is I'm going to hand this over to Mercer here in just a minute. Now, I've known Mercer for well over 10 years at this point, and I've watched his business just absolutely fundamentally grow year after year after year, because a lot of people say, well, I don't really need tracking that much, or I'm just going to use this third-party tool, and they constantly keep on coming back to the customer journey, coming back to Mercer's methodologies. Now, Mercer has worked with some household names that you may know. He's worked with small businesses, medium businesses, all different types of sizes of businesses to help track their overall results and customer experience. So again, I can't stress this enough. We all call him Mercer. He prefers to be called Mercer. I can't stress this enough. Mercer literally is one of the world's top leading online tracking experts. So I brought him here today. We're going to do this video today. Make sure that your team sees this. You start to implement this right away. And then in July, when the big changes hit, we'll do another webinar as well too, just to let everybody kind of know is where's everything lying at right now? What do we do next? But I'm going to turn off my camera. I'm going to shut up, and I'm going to let you take this whole thing over. It is an emergency webinar. This is pretty important, but people can't sit on the laurels and wait for months or weeks. They have to get this installed right away, and they have to get this up and running. So, Mercer, I'm going to hand everything over to you. Again, I really appreciate you being here. There you go, my friend. You have the floor.
Your thing, man. I appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and I just want to say hi to everybody. I'm also going to just shut down my camera so we can focus on the screen share, because I think that is honestly going to be the most important part. So at this point, you should see a nice, big, giant black slide that is up and running here. So the whole point of today is trying to figure out how to get through Google Analytics 4 to survive what is quickly becoming an analytics apocalypse for just about everybody out there. Now, just a little heads up, like as Kurt had mentioned, you have until July 1st. And what Kurt was talking about was the Google Analytics itself stays, but there's an older version called Universal Analytics. That's what everyone's been using for the past, decade or so. That is the one that's going to stop working on July 1st. And what that means is it will not collect new information. So you'll go back there, like to Kurt's example, you go back there on July 6th, and you'll wonder what happened to that week. Like, hey, why am I getting new stuff? Why did it stop working at the end of June? Well, because that's what it was supposed to do. So you'll still have all the previous data in there for a little while, but then eventually that's going to go away. So you really don't have a choice. You have to move to Google Analytics 4 in order to continue to use Google Analytics, and it's completely different platforms. That's what we're trying to educate everybody about. And then through something we'll talk about in just a few minutes, there's another thing. Like, really, you have to start taking action by February 28th. Which I'm going to talk about. So everybody here, it's actually unbelievably good timing, because when Kurt and I originally had sort of set this webinar and what we were going to do with it, a change occurred that just happened a few days back. So it's a very recent change, which is what is accelerating this timeline. So definitely everybody should be leaning in at this point. Like, okay, you have at this point, what are we recording this February 16th? So you've got 12 days to be able to take action on this. So I'm going to show you the thing you should be doing, right? And we're going to cover that today as well. So at least you'll get through that first deadline of the February 28th stuff. More on that in just a little bit. But of course, I want to do quick little introductions. Welcome for those of you who do not me. My name, of course, is Mercer. I do go by Mercer, as Kurt mentioned. There's always another Chris in the room. That's why, and the internet's a big place. So there's plenty of Chris's out there. Our whole claim to fame was, as Kurt had mentioned, helping marketers, marketing teams, and agencies know their numbers and what to do with those numbers to ultimately grow them. We do that through teaching measurement strategy and implementation tactics and stuff like that for all the different free tools that are out there. But we really focus on strategy, because most organizations just don't know how to measure. And when they do, then whatever tool they're using becomes a lot more useful when you understand the strategy behind it. And our flagship program for that is called the Measurement Marketing Academy. It's our just-in-time learning platform. For this training, though, because I have a tendency to give a lot in my webinars, and that's not just me sort of being like a humble brag, although I guess it is, let's be honest, but I give a lot of content. So people will rewatch our workshops, rewatch our trainings, rewatch webinars like this. And every time you rewatch it, you're going to pick up a new one thing, right? Something that's new and different, something you heard that you can take action on. So when you are thinking about the one thing you get from this training, I'm going to give you a few different areas we're going to focus on. First is just getting familiar with Google Analytics 4. That might be your one thing. Like, I got to see the platform, get interested into it. We're going to go through the what's and whys of it, like what it looks like, why it exists, how to think about it, all that fun stuff. Then we're going to move into some general best practices. So for those of you who are thinking about using it, or maybe have started to use it, we're going to talk about how it fits into a measurement tech stack, as well as the strategy that you can use. And I will give you that strategy on this call today, so you'll have that as well. And then we will talk about migration mistakes, some of which you may have already made. So I'm going to, because Google's making it really, really easy to make mistakes. And so that's why, again, not your fault, but we're going to show you some things that people are doing that are errors when they start moving over to Google Analytics 4. And this is something we're calling Never Let Google Clean Your Room, which will make more sense as we go through, but that's exactly what they're going to do if you don't do it. And finally, this is the change. This is the thing that just came out. Most of you probably already got an email about this if you're currently using Google Analytics. And this is them saying, hey, we're going to take care of this for you, which sounds great. And I promise you, you do not want them to do this. So we're going to go into some deep dive as to why that is. And then we'll have time for Q&A at the end of this as well. All right, let's go ahead and jump right in. We're going to start with why Google Analytics 4 in the first place. Just a quick catch up for all of you who are just sort of like, okay, what is this thing? Now's the deadline. I got to start looking at it. So long story short, this is universal analytics, or at least this is how I think about it. The original, Google Analytics. This is just a car that's been breaking down for a long, long time, and they've been constantly patching it. So it'll break down, they throw in the new wheel. It'll break down, or the headlights go out, they replace the headlights, right? And they're constantly trying to get this car up and running. But this particular car was built for a very different world, right? It was built for a world where the roads were straight. Wasn't a lot of traffic, so you can kind of go kind of slow, right? You don't have to worry about super speed. There was no twists and turns to have to deal with, and the road was very paved and clean, right? That was the old world of measurement, and this sort of measurement vehicle worked in those days when we didn't have a whole lot, when your Nest thermostat didn't plug into the internet and report back to stuff. Like it was just a different world, right? So this is our world today. There are no roads. Everything's different. Everything's constantly changing. There are storms everywhere. And I don't try to sensationalize this. This is the world. This is how I see it, especially when it comes to data and everything else that's going on in this industry. So we'll talk more about what this is in a second, go through the specifics, but this particular vehicle, if you're using this for your measurement vehicle, even if you slap on a new wheel, you cannot do the fancy stuff you need to do to navigate through this world. It just isn't capable anymore, right? It's just grown beyond what that tool can provide, what that measurement vehicle can give you. So you need a new vehicle. And that's what GA4 is. This is how I think about GA4. So it's the bright, shiny object, of course. It's been rebuilt from the ground up. There's not a single part of the old car that's in the new car other than the name, right? But that's it. Everything else has been rebuilt from the ground up. So it's completely different. It's a completely different animal. And we'll show you that in a second so you can see it. But essentially, when you look at a car like this, you're like, okay, it doesn't need roads, number one, which is great. It can get wherever I want it to go. It's got a lot of bells and whistles on it, some of which I might never use. And that's okay, because if I find myself in a situation where I need those tools, it has them. And that's the key with GA4. It is built to survive the future. This is our future. So there's really three big superstorms going on. We've got tech, which has been going on for years and will continue to. You've got laws, GDPR, things like that. You've got users that are constantly, finding out new creative ways so they're not measured. And here we are in the middle of this mess, trying to figure out, how do I navigate through this as a marketer? I still have to make decisions. I still got to find those insights. I still want to take actions to improve things, but how do I do it in this sort of terrain? And the answer is you got to upgrade your tools, right? So we go into something like this for GA4. You can navigate through, because you're using this as your measurement vehicle. You are navigating through the territory a lot easier than somebody that's using the old beaten down, old Model T looking forward thing. So let's talk about the storms very quickly and how GA4 helps with this. So tech stuff is where the platforms themselves are changing the rules. So iOS did it to, or Apple, I should say, did it to Facebook through iOS. They changed the rules on Facebook and devastated their company, right? So that's a change of tech. It affected a lot of marketers, but Apple's been doing that for years, right? So they did it with Safari a long time before, the years and years before that. Nobody cared because Facebook didn't care, to be honest. But it's been going on for a long, long time. Google Chrome is coming out, and they're going to be deprecating what they call third-party cookies. So whenever you hear people talking about cookies are going away, they really mean these third-party cookies are going away, but they're getting rid of them in 2024. So within a year or two, they'll be gone in Chrome as well. This means the tech is changing, and it will be harder to measure people on your site, right? Harder to measure people on your site. So GA4 helps with this because it understands, like, hey, I'm being born into this world that's just what's happening. We understand there's technical changes. So it's changing how it measures stuff, and it measures things across devices pretty easily, pretty naturally. Those of you who have apps, like true apps on your iOS or Android app, you can now measure those and connect it into your website so you can see the crisscross in between. Like, it's built to do this sort of stuff. And it's focused on the user behaviors, which is nice. The old original Universal Analytics or Google Analytics was more session-based. What did people do in their visits, which was important, but users are what we're asking questions around. What are our users doing, and measuring our users across time? And that's what GA4 is really, really good at. Now, when it comes to the laws, obviously GDPR being the poster child, but California's got them, Utah's got it, the US will absolutely have it. So those of you living here with myself in the US, don't think that's not going to hit you. It will. It's going to be a few years, but it'll be here for sure. And essentially what that means is control of the data. That's what the laws are all about. So instead of the users giving up their control, like if I click a like button on Facebook and Facebook owns that like, that's not the case anymore. I own that like. I'm essentially just giving Facebook the ability to control that, but I can go to Facebook and say, I don't want you to have that anymore, and they need to get rid of it. Right. So that's what the laws are doing. They're putting the power back in the hands of the users, in my opinion, where it should have been all along. But the important thing when it comes to you is you will have to get stuff out of Google Analytics eventually. If you haven't already, you're going to get an email from somebody that says, hey, I want you to delete my data, and you got to be able to do it. So a tool like Google Analytics 4 makes that possible. The older Google Analytics, you can't, which is why Google's getting rid of it for everybody, because they don't want that data either. It's a liability for them. So that's why they're getting rid of it. It's not because they don't like you. It's because they don't want to have to pay the fines. So they're getting rid of that stuff, giving you a tool that will help you to manage your data better. And not only can you get the data out of GA4, if you need to delete it for whatever reason, you can put it in there in very specific ways too. So it gives you more control so that you're not measuring just generic stuff like the old Google Analytics used to do. You're measuring very specific behaviors that are useful for your business model, for your brand, to answer your questions so that you can take the actions that you need to take. So it is a whole other level of granular control that lights up if you use it properly. Now, the third storm here, users, right? They're the ones that basically kicked off the other two storms. So users, if they're not, let's say I use Chrome right now and I get tired of it, I'll be like, you know what? I'm going to use Brave. I'll use Vivaldi, some other browser that automatically makes it so I can't be measured, right? Or maybe I like Chrome and I don't want to keep using Chrome, but I'm going to put an ad blocker. Block the ads, blocks the measurement. right? So users are causing issues where they aren't going to be measured. And this isn't the webinar where we sit here and say, okay, let's get together because all the users don't want to be measured. So here's how you measure them instead. You cannot measure them. That's the point of this. The world is different. There is no backdoor to measure the users, right? There's no ethical backdoor to do that. So you have to start using a platform that just gets it, that goes, hey, that's okay. I am built for this. I am built to know that I'm not measuring every single person doing every single thing on the site. And it's still okay. I'm going to be useful, right? So how does it do that? Well, it's got machine learning and AI built into it at the core. And everybody that knows me knows I am not a fan of everybody talking about machine learning and AI. Not to say that ChatGPT is not a thing. That's a definite thing. Don't get me wrong. But there's a lot of, in my opinion, kind of BS SaaS stuff that's out there that say we have AI and it's just some stupid formula. It's not real AI. Google has real AI. Google has real machine learning. They've been using it for decades, right? As they improve search. So they've taken that, they have that at the core of this platform, and they built GA4 on top of it. So it knows how to model. And that's what's important here, because you're going to have to get used to that. We're going to have to change how we market to some extent, because you're going to have model data everywhere. Those of you doing a lot of Facebook ads, you're already familiar with modeling because you had no choice, because Facebook had no choice. They also had to model data. So everybody has to model data. This is not a thing where you're like, oh, I'm going to figure out how to not have to do that. That's just you're going to fall behind. I guarantee it. You're going to fall behind. It might work for a few months, but you're going to fall behind. Everybody else who understands how to use model data will rocket past you and leave you in dust. So very important you start using these tools so that you can understand how to work in this new way. Right? GA4, again, is built for that. And this leads me to a really big thing you're going to see a lot here, just in terms of themes. Measurement is a department now. It is not a project. So I want to make sure that everybody here watching this has that mindset shift. This is not, oh, we're going to set up some goals in Google Analytics and then we're done with measurement, or, oh, we're going to create this one report and then we're done measuring stuff. You know, it's we don't have to do it anymore. And we just use the reports. Those days are so gone. They've been gone for many, many years, to be honest, but now they're absolutely gone. Measurement is a department. It changes all the time. You have to have somebody that is maintaining it, somebody that is on it, somebody that understands it. Right? Or else you're going to be looking at essentially bad information. You're going to make really bad choices. So think about this. Now, let's talk briefly about tool versus trade. Again, this is another mindset thing, and then we'll get into looking at GA4. The tool versus trade conversation is, let's say I want to learn how to cook and all I know how to do is boil an egg. So if I want to learn how to cook, I might go to like the food shows, right? And watch the food shows on the TV and say, oh, I'm going to learn how to cook. And I can come to the conclusion pretty quickly. I can be like, well, you know why they're really good? They're really good because they have all these fancy tools. And so I might spend a ton of money buying a bunch of tools, ripping out my kitchen, putting in all the fancy stuff that this super cool chef has, thinking that's why I'm not a good chef, because I don't have the right tools. If I had the sharp knives, if I had all the fancy ovens, if I had the blancher, if I had the vacuum sealer, then I would also be able to make infused chicken or whatever that they were creating. But then I'm going to buy all that stuff and boil an egg. Why? Because I never learned how to cook. Because if you think about it, a really good chef, I could give them a camper stove and a cheap pan from a dollar store, and they will figure out how to make an amazing meal because they know how to cook. They have the strategy. And for those of you going, it kind of makes sense, think about this. How many tools have you bought for marketing? How many tools have you bought for measurement? How many quote unquote push button simple things have you added to your stack? I've kind of got like an AppSumo diet on myself, but nothing against AppSumo. I love them, but man, every time I go in there, I'm dropping money, and then I never use the tools, right? So how many tools have you bought that have promised you results that you just don't get, or eventually you stop trusting them because you start going, well, this number doesn't seem to, well, you know what? I'm not sure, but I don't even know anymore. And then you stop using the tool. That is because you did not have a proper strategy. So tools alone will not save you. Strategies will. Now, this is a measurement marketing framework. We're going to go through a specific measurement strategy that you can absolutely use. I'm going to do this on this call. So all of you will get this. I'm going to go through this piece by piece in just a little bit here. So now that you know the why, right? Let's talk about getting familiar with Google Analytics 4. I want to give you kind of a first look and just a general tour of where everything is to help give you some lay of the land, right? A little map of how to use the tool. So we're going to dive in and I'm going to take a look. We're going to pull this up first here. And let me see if I can get my screen to work. Here we go. Okay. So what we're going to look at is, there we go. All right, we should be seeing it. So this is the Google Analytics 4 interface. When you first come into it, kind of a general home screen. Personally, I don't use this for anything at all. But the way to think about this is like your 25-mile high view, right? So you're like way into the stratosphere, and you're kind of looking down on everything. Very, very, very general information, not particularly useful, but it's there, right? So then they have these things called workspaces, which is pretty cool. I like how this is organized. Each of these workspaces is kind of like its own separate SaaS, is how I would think about this. It's its own separate SaaS system that is pulling from all of your data. So it's like different views of your data is how to look at this. So you've got your home workspace, which is like your 25-mile high view. Again, really general information that's through here. Not a whole lot. So these things are called cards that they do, but it's, again, very general. When you go into the reports workspace, that's like 10,000 feet high, right? So now you're getting a little closer to your information and you start to see a completely different interface. Again, think about it like a different SaaS tool that accesses the same data as all the other ones do, but it's displayed differently for you to answer different questions. So with this one, again, it starts with a kind of what I think is a very overview, all right, just too general to be particularly useful. But you have things like real time, so which I think they did a huge upgrade on. I really like the real time stuff, and you can see where everybody's kind of visiting their sites. But this is really designed to answer like, is this thing turned on? That's really it. You don't use this to make any marketing decisions, but I'll tell you, it's really fun when you do a launch and you send an email and you're like, let's go light it up, and you watch this thing happen. It's freaking cool. I love it. That said, not particularly useful for marketing action other than, is this working? Is it turned on? Right. Then we come into lifecycle. So under lifecycle reports, you've got acquisition, which is about where the users are coming from. And I'm going to bring up just one of these reports, but know there are two versions of this. Those of you familiar with the original Google Analytics, right, called Universal Analytics, that is the source medium report, right? And that's kind of what you probably used a lot. So we can see our source mediums. This is kind of the same thing. You have these acquisition reports that are back here that show, okay, where's the traffic coming from? How many of the traffic are we getting? Are they engaged, right? What are these engagement metrics? And then what are the results are we getting, right? In terms of revenue and results that we're trying to measure for, all in one report, which is really cool. The thing about GA4 that already gives you an idea of like, wow, this thing is different, is user acquisition. So what this does is this measures the original source of traffic that got the user to your site in the first place, at least according to GA4, right? So it automatically measures the original source of traffic that acquired that user. Then there's a whole other separate thing that then talks about the different traffic source for each individual session from that user. So which is really cool. This is, by the way, more closer related to your source media report if you're used to using that already. So that's acquisition, all about where the users are coming from. You've got engagement. This is all about what actions are they taking. So you can see kind of like the pages and screens, right? What pages are they viewing? You can kind of see that sort of stuff. You can see the landing pages coming through and that sort of stuff is back there. You have these things called events in GA4. Everything in GA4 is an event. So that you can, and the way to think about this and why this platform is so amazing is events are just behaviors, right? They're just behaviors. So think about it like that. And it's like, okay, well, who viewed a promotion? That's an event. Who viewed a page? That's an event. Who viewed a list of items? That's an event. You know, who scrolled, who started their sessions, who viewed a particular item, a product detail page, who was a new user, who's a predicted top spender. These are all behaviors. And you can fire events into Google Analytics 4. It records those. And then you can start to build funnels out of those events. I want to see people who saw my offer page, then opted in, then 7 days later bought from an email. You can do that in GA4. You can build these things in GA4 because of this structure. But it is 100% different than Universal Analytics, than the original Analytics. It has nothing in common with how Universal Analytics works. Completely different. I'm emphasizing that for a reason, and I'll show you more as we go through. So you've got the engagement, right? All about what are the actions that people are taking. And then monetization. This is about all of the results. What are the results of all those actions, right? The big important one back here is going to be this e-commerce stuff for most of us. So what products did I sell? How many, and then it gives you a little bit of a funnel idea in terms of like, how many were viewed, how many were added to cart, how many of those purchased, and then what the amounts were. So you have a little bit of a story of which particular products might be more popular or more likely to be purchased or added to cart, or worse, cart abandoned, right? That could be an audience you could build, send that to Google Ads and have Google Ads retarget them. Some really cool stuff that you can do with this platform. So that's the life cycle section here, right? Where are they coming from? What actions are they taking? What are the results of those actions? And then you might want to ask questions around like, well, who are they? Who are the users? Am I talking to who I think I'm talking to? I think that's an important question. So you can come into the overview reports and the demographics. It gives you where they're from. You have some gender, age details, interest details, just typical demographic data. And then here in the tech, same thing, just except now it's all about the tech. So, mobile, desktop, tablet, what browser, screen size, all this sort of geeky stuff, if that's what you're into, is all in the tech. But essentially these user, what they call the collection here, this little user collection, this is all about who the user is, right? So you can learn more about them and make sure it is who you're talking to is who you think you're talking to. Very important concept there. So that's the reports workspace. Then you have explorations. Now this, kind of continuing our little trend here, this is where you're on the ground, right? You're in the dirt here. You're getting dirty with your data. And so I'm not going to go too far into this, but I want to show you some templates just so you can kind of see what's possible. But you create essentially these custom reports, again, that access the data. They work completely differently than Universal Analytics, but you can create like a custom sort of regular table report, what they call the free form. You can create these funnels. So again, people that saw a page, opted in, bought from an email within 7 days. Like you could do that here. You can do a path exploration. Maybe the funnel's not working the way you want it to. So what do? You create a path exploration. Well, they showed up on the offer page. And then what did they do? They didn't go where I wanted them to. Did they go someplace else? And you can see that. So now if you can see where they're going, you go, oh, well, there's the leak. I need to go figure that out, right? Let's change the copy or change the marketing. You've got segment overlap reports, right? So people like how many people are using both mobile and desktop at the same time, things like that. Cohorts for measuring groups over time, user lifetime value for those that are interested in doing that. So that's the Explore workspace. Again, completely different section, and it looks completely different. It works completely different. I'm going to click in one of these just so you can see the format. That's how different it looks. Again, we don't have time to really show how to use this, but completely different because it's a separate little SAS that's organized, pulling the same data that you've collected, but it's for a completely different reason. And this is why I say that this is ground level, right? You are in the home screen. You are 25-mile high, right? Looking down on your data. Here in the report section, the reports workspace, you're at 10,000-foot views, kind of getting good information. It's a lot clearer, but you're still pretty far away. The explorations, when you set those up, you're on the ground in the dirt playing with this, right? So that's how you think about those. And then you've got advertising. This is another workspace that is 100% focused on answering questions around conversions, and that's it. So you come up here and you say, okay, well, here's my conversion. Think about these as goals. That's what they used to be called in Universal Analytics, the older version of Google Analytics. There are no more goals. There are only conversions. So here's a conversion that I'm interested in learning about. You click on apply. Everything changes to now in this entire section to just talk about that one purchase event. So now you can see the different default channel groups that are coming through. You can see paths, and then you can get some more details. So I can go into attribution and comparing attribution, especially if I'm traffic or running an agency with traffic. This might be helpful to explain how your traffic is influencing. Maybe if it doesn't create the result, but it influences the result, you can kind of show that stuff here. You can see conversion paths, which are how all the different traffic sources are working together to combine for the conversion. You can see which ones are really good at influencing early on, midpoint, and then, of course, which ones are more likely to cause or create the result you're trying to measure for, the conversion that you're trying to measure for. They even have a brand new one. This came out a couple of days ago, actually, with the conversion differences. They help you troubleshoot. Like, why doesn't my Google Analytics match my Google ads? They have little troubleshooters back here now. This is brand new. It's like 48 hours old as of this recording. So constantly changing platform. And then, of course, you've got your traditional channels report here, right? It's kind of showing, what's happening over time, how many purchases and what the cost was with your Google Ads data, in this case, coming through, so you can do a little bit of ROAS and ROI calculations there. So that's the advertising workspace. Now, there's this one workspace here called Configure that really isn't anything anymore. It used to have a bunch of settings. They have moved them to the admin workspace. So I'm going to show you that in a second. But that's what I like showing this, because it shows you an example of how this platform is changing. 6 months ago, this was lit up with a bunch of stuff. Then they realized, hey, this doesn't make sense. Let's move it. And the platform's changed. GA4 evolves. In other words, measurement is a department. You have to stay up to date. You don't have the option of set and forget. That does not exist in the world of measurement. And anybody that tells you that is mistaken, right? I won't say they're lying because they probably believe it, but they are mistaken. You have to maintain your measurement systems, and being up to date on the tools is an important maintenance feature, right? So GA4 coming through. There's the admin workspace, which is way down at the bottom. Kind of looks like what Universal did, the older version, with the exception that there are no views. That was the third column that used to be here. And we'll come back to this in a second because I'm going to show you this, or maybe in a few minutes from now, because I'm going to show you some different settings that people are messing up back here that are going to make their GA4 a little harder to use. And so we're going to cover that in just a little bit. So I'm going to leave it here just because we're going to come back to this as well. So with that, you're familiar with GA4. And I just want to sort of mention, if anyone's got questions here, you happen to be watching this live, pop those questions into the Q&As and we'll go through those kind of at the end of all of this content as we go through. Just remind me kind of what the question was about, since we're going to tackle it at the end. All right. So now that you're familiar with GA4, let's talk about how it fits into a measurement tech stack. Because remember, measurement's a department. You need measurement tech now. Like, that's just how it is. There is no just one tool that fits them all. So I wanted to talk about it because there's a lot of confusion because there are so many tools. And I get it. When I started this, when Kurt and I first met, right, there was just Google Analytics. There was not Tag Manager. There was not GA4. There was not Tag Manager server side. There was no Data Studio, which then became Looker Studio, right? There was none of that stuff. So I wanted to sort of emphasize that I get it because it is confusing. It's not you. It's not that you don't, it's not that you can't get it. It is confusing. You have a right to be confused as to how this stuff fits together. So I wanted to give you a way to think about it so you can figure this out. So every measurement system has these things in common, yours included, right? Yours, I don't care if you're using a spreadsheet to measure stuff. This is what you're doing. You have to collect the information. You have to store that information somewhere, right? And then you report on the information. And that's where you actually interact with it and get your insights from. So everybody uses this collect, store, and report method, right? How do we collect? Well, GA4 does this on its own. You have a script, what they call the Google tag. You'll put the tag on your page, and then that script will start collecting some basic information, some basic behaviors coming through. Then you have to store it somewhere. Well, this is where GA4 really shines, because GA4 is a behavioral database. And you saw kind of that interface of those workspaces and you go, wow. So what it's doing is it's accessing, they basically created 4 separate SaaS areas, 4 separate SaaS data tools that are accessing that database, right? That is the GA4 behavioral database. That's pretty cool, because that means if they have 4, they could have 5, they could have 6, they could add more, and they probably will, would be my guess. Then there's the reporting, right? This is where those workspace reports were showing up, whether that's an exploration, whether you're in the advertising section, asking questions around your conversions, or you're at the 25-mile home screen, you're seeing the report side of things. That's where you actually interact with the number and then you can make your decisions. Google Analytics 4 can do all 3 of these. And if you are just using Google Analytics 4, that is 1000% awesome. You don't need anything else to get started, right? You don't need anything else, and I'm going to emphasize, to get started. Now, eventually, here's what will happen. And here's how these other tools that you've probably heard about come into play. Eventually, you're going to start asking more specific questions. In other words, you're going to get your basic questions answered. And it's kind of like climbing a mountain. Once you climb the first mountaintop, you're going to see the second mountaintop. It's like that with answering questions with measurement. As soon as you answer your basic questions, like how many people are opting in for our leads, you will get a number and you get really good at knowing that number. Then you start going, well, we have 4 different lead magnets. Which one's better, right? Well, that's a more specific question, just as an example. So in order to collect sometimes some more specific behaviors that you need, like lead type or something like that, you need a different tool, because at a certain point, you either have to bring on a developer to custom code all of the stuff in GA4, because it can do it with code. It's just hard. And why? Because they have this thing called Tag Manager that does this for you. It's essentially made for marketers to be able to do the stuff that would otherwise have to go to a developer. And not to say that you exclude developers entirely if you're a larger company that needs that. But Tag Manager, you can do so much as a marketer and measure for very specific conversations that are happening on the site, right? You can measure to say, like, are they taking the behaviors that I want them to take? Very specific things like, think about this if you're a Shopify store. Did they see my photos? How do I know that? Well, they would click on them. Well, are they clicking on the photos? You can't measure that default. You have to use Tag Manager. What about, did they check out my reviews? How can I tell? Did they watch my video? How can I tell? That's what Tag Manager does. So it measures for those collections. It collects those behaviors but it doesn't store anything and it doesn't report anything. It's a completely separate tool from Google, again, free, but it's separate. So Tag Manager is a whole other platform you have to learn. So in the beginning, you don't use Tag Manager. It's too much. You don't want to learn all these platforms at once. It will be impossible for you to use them. You just pick the one. So start with GA4, but eventually you will grow into Tag Manager. At least you should be growing into Tag Manager, or else you're not asking detailed enough questions, right? But that's eventually you grow into it. Then where do we store it? We store it in GA4. It's an incredible database. It's a database that's designed to store behaviors. You keep your information there. Then there's the reports. What about reports? There's a platform called Looker Studio. Used to be called Data Studio for those that might be familiar with that name. They just changed the name for, I don't know, because they're Google. So they just changed it to Looker Studio. So now it's Looker Studio. But it's a platform that only builds reports and dashboards. So instead of looking at tables all the time, because I get it, like I'm a numbers person, but I don't want to stare at a spreadsheet all day long either. I like looking at funnels. I like looking at pictures that show like thumbs up, thumbs down. That's what Looker Studio can do. So Looker Studio connects into the GA4 database, right? And then it can build prettier pictures that are simpler to take action on. So that's how these three platforms work together. But to emphasize the point here, you do not have to use all three today. Get good at GA4 first, right? Get good at GA4 first. Eventually, you will grow into a system where you start using the other two, but you want to learn, you want to get into it. Now, if you're already using Tag Manager, I'm not saying stop using Tag Manager at all. If you're in it, you're already in it. Don't worry about it. There is no backing out. That's not what I'm saying. But GA4, what this is for those people who are like, wow, there's GA4, there's Tag Manager, there's Looker Studio. I'm going to go learn all three. And I say this from experience because we have students who have tried. Do not do that. Start with GA4. Learn the platform, move into Tag Manager when the time's ready. If you're already using Tag Manager because you use it with Universal Analytics, use it for GA4 because you already know Tag Manager. Not a big deal, right? So that's how to think about it. But remember, this is just emphasizing the point we've been talking about here. Measurement's a department. You need it needs resources, not just money for, certain tools or whatever, but you need training for it. You have to stay up to date with it because this stuff changes constantly and it will continue to for, I would assume, the foreseeable future. So this concept, we now know how GA4 sort of fits into a tech stack. If you're just starting out, GA4 is perfectly fine to use. You don't have to do the fancier tools. If you're already using Tag Manager, Looker Studio, cool. Just use those with GA4. Not a big deal, right? If you're already using them. But don't try to do all three from scratch. Don't try to learn all three at once. It'll be way too much. I would personally do it in the order GA4, then Tag Manager, then Looker Studio is how I would do it personally. All right. So let's talk about GA4 and strategy. And I already see the questions coming in, which is awesome. So keep the questions loaded up, and then we will go through them at the end of our content here. I want to talk about GA4 and strategy because strategy unlocks the tools, right? This is how to cook. This is what, going back to that example of like boiling an egg. Why would you buy a bunch of fancy tools, but you replace your kitchen and then just use it to boil an egg? It would be a waste of your money and your time and your effort. That people do it all the time with measurement. They buy new tools and then they eventually stop trusting those tools because they never learned how to use measurement in a company. So I wanted to give you a measurement strategy. We're going to start from scratch. I am going to go through this a little bit quickly, but because I'm going to give you access to a free course that does go through this in great detail. But I wanted everybody familiar with the basics because even if you were familiar with the basics, it's important. You can start using this today in your own organization. The whole point of this is to move us as marketers from marketing in the blind, meaning we're guessing all the time. Maybe we're professionally guessing. Professional guesses are where you pay for that $25,000 mastermind to be next to a person who just guesses for you. But it's just guessing. Let's face it. We're marketing in the blind most of the time. Opinions, right? Battles. It's all politics. Then we want to be able to get to this point where we are just producing revenue and profits. That's what we all want. But the way to do that is, in my opinion, to build a system where you just go through a certain set of activities that as long as you just keep going through these certain set of activities, they produce the result that you want as a byproduct, kind of automated, right? So I'm going to show you how we're going to do that. So revenue and profits are a byproduct of this system. They're the result you want. I get that, but they're just going to naturally happen if you keep using the system. That's the idea. So here's how. Yes, you just plan things out, you build it out, and then you launch it, but it's the how you do these things that's the important secret sauce. So I'm going to cover those very quickly here to kind of give you the keys to these steps. The planning step, the first thing you do is you list out all the questions you're trying to answer. Do not worry about the right questions. That's the first thing people stop themselves. Like, well, I don't know if I'm asking the right questions. It doesn't matter. Ask questions, because you know how you get better at asking questions? by asking questions, and then you get better at it. Because sometimes you'll see like, oh, that wasn't a very useful question, and you'll stop asking that. Now you're building muscle, right? What we call measurement muscle, but you're building measurement muscle, and you start asking better questions over time, relatively quickly, by the way. You won't keep asking dumb questions if you find out later it was a dumb question. And don't get me wrong, I've literally asked tens of thousands of dumb questions. It happens to all of us. Not a big deal. It's not a judgy thing. It's just like, oh, that wasn't particularly useful. You stop asking it, you move on, right? So you list out all the questions you're trying to answer. Things like, what are my opt-in rates? What are my purchases, right? Some of that stuff you're probably already thinking about, what we call results questions, but also ask how questions. How am I getting those leads? In other words, not just the traffic source, but how many people are seeing the opt-in? How many people are seeing the pop-up, that maybe you have a pop-up where they click on a button, much like I think this webinar was that you signed up for, there was a pop-up, right? Well, if Kurt had a problem with the opt-in rate, which fortunately he did not, it was awesome. But if Kurt had a problem with it, he would be able to tell, well, is it because they were clicking the button and they just weren't opting in, or is it because they weren't clicking on the button? There's two different problems, right? And he has two different solutions for each of those. But that's why you ask questions around what the behaviors are. Then you collect the information. So we would collect the page views. We would collect the pop-up, when the pop-up views and happens, right? We collect all the information. And then we think about the actions we're going to take based upon the answers we're about to get. So just very generally, go back to the opt-in rate example. The way you think about actions, and this is so important because people skip this because they do not know. It's the only reason. They just don't know that this is a thing to do here. And I'm emphasizing this is in the planning stage, not when you look at your Google Analytics. Before you open up that spreadsheet, before you look at your CRM, you're doing this on like a whiteboard or a back of a napkin. That's all that matters here. So you think about, let's say the opt-in rate question. What's the opt-in rate for this webinar? I expect it to be, it's warm traffic. So let's say it should be 50 to 60%. Okay. If it comes in at less than, let's say 40%, we're going to look at the targeting of the ad. We're going to look at the messaging, and we're going to see kind of what's going on and adjust the page. If it's coming in at substantially higher than 60%, we might want to scale traffic because maybe it's too hot of an audience and we've got some room to expand the traffic. And if it comes in between 50 and 60%, it's like, cool, let's try to, increase that traffic while maintaining that percentage. So I have 3 different actions I've already decided I can take based upon the number that I haven't even measured for yet. But this is important. Because how many times have you found in an organization, maybe yours, where you hear things like, well, we have a bunch of numbers, we have no idea what to do with it. We got a bunch of reports, nobody knows what to do with them. We have all this data, but there's no story. You know why? Because nobody thought about it ahead of time. Nobody planned out their actions ahead of time. If you just do that, if you take that one thing, in fact, I'd love to know if this is your one thing from this training so far. If you just took this one thing, it will change your world. Because what will also start happening, this is how you start eliminating those questions that maybe aren't so useful, is sometimes you'll get to the action stage and you won't be able to figure it out. You'll be like, I don't know what we can do with that. And then you realize, oh, we were just measuring for measurement's sake. We're just collecting data for data's sake. And that's going to be not great because the more data you have, the more compliance issues you will have in the future. So you want to make sure that you're only keeping the data that is useful to you as an organization for your brand. So that's the action step. And when you have those, you have your measurement plan basically done. At that point, you move into your tool and you set it up. So in this case, using Google Analytics 4 as an example, you would set up what they call conversion events, right? So everything's an event in GA4. You would just set up conversion events. What we recommend is that you set them up measuring for customer journeys. Think about what I would call user journeys. So a user journey might be a purchase, right? Like an e-commerce store might say, okay, I want to see product detail views, add to carts, begin checkouts, and then when they purchase, fine. That's a good user journey. But there's also the user journey to become a lead. There's the user journey to get familiar with your brand. Maybe you've got a membership site. There's a user journey of did they use your products in the membership site if you're trying to improve engagement. Maybe you're an affiliate marketer and you've got a blog that sends a bunch of Amazon stuff. There's still a user journey that you expect that blog to work in a certain way. So what I'm emphasizing here on this results section is you use a tool like Google Analytics 4 to measure the different stages of that journey. So you measure when they were aware of the journey, you measure when they finished, when we saw completed the journey, and then you measure as they engage along the way. That way, you have a nice little funnel that shows you a complete picture of what's working and what's not. So you can pretty quickly fix things because you can see things. It's like having a flashlight in a dark room. All of a sudden, you can see around you. You can navigate better, right? That's what measurement is. It gives us visibility. So then you make sure, once you've got your results being measured, you make sure that the traffic is being defined. Now, in Google Analytics, it'll be something called UTMs. If you're not familiar with what a UTM is, just Google it. Just UTM, just the letters U, T, and M, and then Google Analytics. That's all you need to do. And you will see millions of blog posts about UTMs and thousands of videos, including ours, about UTMs and structure. But the important part is just using them in a specific way so that the system, in this case, Google Analytics 4, the tool that you're using, it knows who is sending you traffic, what type of traffic are they sending you, and what is the point of that traffic, what customer journey were they supposed to be a part of, what user journey were they supposed to help with. So when Kurt does his traffic, he can say, okay, well, here's my Facebook traffic coming from Facebook. It is paid ads, let's say, coming from Facebook. So that's the type of traffic, paid traffic. And it's for the purposes of, the analytics apocalypse webinar, right? The dealing with GA4 webinar. And so now Google Analytics 4, he can go into his Google Analytics 4 and he can see that. He can see, okay, here's my Facebook traffic that was supposed to get them to register for the webinar. Did it get them to register for the webinar? And then he can measure against the result. That is how you start to see a natural story appear. And when it's a natural story, it leads to natural action. And now think about this step. If you have ever gone into Google Analytics and it feels like the Matrix, right? It feels like there's answers there. It's trying to tell you something, but you look at it and your eyes glaze over and you're like, I have no idea what this thing is telling me. Like that is a analytics platform that's not been properly set up. If you set it up properly, right, which there are a series of steps to do that, but if you set it up properly, it will tell you a natural story, meaning when you get back there, you will start to see like, oh, this is what's going on. I get it now. And all of a sudden, and you just get it. It's almost like you know how to decode the matrix, but you didn't have to decode anything. You just taught the platform how to speak back to you. That's what a story is. And so when you have natural story, it leads to natural action. So you can actually take those insights and turn them into meaningful results. Now, once you've got your build out done, in other words, you've set up the tool properly and it's starting to collect data, we start using it. In other words, we launch the thing. We're going to use it, right? The very first thing here is listen. And this is a mindset shift because what are we listening for? We're listening to the conversation that is happening between the users and your website, right? That's what we're listening for. Measurements, just like you and I could be having a conversation in the real world, I would adjust my conversation based on what you say and vice versa. Well, that same thing should be happening digitally, but it doesn't. Why? Because digital marketers don't listen. No offense, but they don't listen. Now, in this case, why? Well, because they don't know that they can listen. Measurement is how we listen to their side of the conversation. And then marketing is what we do to adjust our side of the conversation to keep the conversation going in the direction we want it to go. So that's the whole listening thing. You listen to the conversation, you basically do trends and patterns is sort of the secret to that. And you look at the different trends and patterns coming through, and then you compare them to a forecast that you should already have. And this is the other thing that people mess up. Again, because they don't realize they should be doing it. That's the only reason. Forecasting is you have to have an understanding of how things are supposed to work, even if in the beginning, and you probably will in the beginning, even if you just guess. Doesn't matter. You can be totally wrong. In fact, I'm wrong all the time. Doesn't matter. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about having an intention of how your marketing is supposed to be working in the first place. One of my famous stories, I was flown out to an organization. We were doing some training for an institution in California, flew out to their offices and had a conference room of about 15 people around the room. And they asked me, they're like, okay, we're just trying to figure out how our blog is working, right? I'm like, okay, that's a great question. How is your blog supposed to work? Crickets. Nobody had ever thought about that. Now, spoiler alert, I knew that was the answer because I don't ask questions I don't already know the answers to. But I guarantee you guys don't know the answers either because no one's ever thought about it. Again, not our fault, just never came up. We never really had an understanding of how the offer page, what specific behaviors are they supposed to be doing on the offer page? Scrolling? Sure. How far down? Which button are they supposed to click on? What part of it are they supposed to look at for how long? Right? All this different stuff you can measure for. And then you can compare it against your forecast so you can actually answer the question, is my marketing working the way it's supposed to? You start marketing forward and it feels very much like driving through a windshield as opposed to the rearview mirror, right? So if you're in the car, obviously it makes sense to drive through the windshield. You try to drive through the rearview mirror, it's a lot harder to use your car. But marketers every day jump in their car and use the rearview mirror, right? That's because they don't know there's a windshield in front of them. They just can't see it. But measurement gives you that windshield. You start marketing forward. You start comparing the trends and patterns to what the trends and patterns are supposed to be. And then when you know that, you will instantly see what's working and what's not. And that's where this optimization step comes in. And in reality, that's the step everybody's trying to get to so fast. That's all everybody wants to know is, what am I supposed to optimize? What am I supposed to change? What am I supposed to adjust? And they guess because they have no other option to do it. But I promise you, if you go through these particular steps and each key to these steps, right? You plan, you build, you launch, and you follow these keys as you go through this process, you cannot help but be led to the part, like everyone's looking for the lever that's going to move the needle. You cannot help but be led to that part where at better than average chance, it's going to actually impact stuff. And that's the beauty of this system, because when you do that, you end up with revenue and profits because you see the result. You tweak it. You go, oh, here's the area that's actually not working. Let's adjust this because now we have our resources focused on the area most likely to move the needle. And then, of course, you measure against it to make sure it's working, right? And you rinse and repeat. The only difference between where you are right now and where I am right now is that I have gone through this exact framework thousands and thousands and thousands of times and will continue to. I'm just further ahead. I'm on the same path, though. I have stood on the exact same part of the path that you are on now. Promise you, right? So just go through this and you just keep using it over and over again. And you cannot help but be successful if you keep with it. So that is the measurement marketing framework that is yours. And anybody, even at that level of knowledge with it, it will change how things are working in your organization. You start to get more of a measurement culture. The tools all of a sudden start to make sense because the strategy is now dictating the tool and not the other way around. You don't want your tools dictating your strategy. You don't want to be limited by your tools. Your strategy should dictate what tools you use and how you use them and when you use them. So that is your strategy. Now, we do have the Measurement Marketing Academy. I'm sure Kurt and team will put these links into the chat. We've got the Measurement Marketing Academy that we offer. I mentioned that earlier. It has both strategy courses, which I think are more important, to be honest, but we also cover the tools. So if you want to learn how to use the tools, they're all the courses are back there as well. So you'll have some time to do that. And there is actually a free option as well that we have. We have different levels of the Academy. That free option gives you the strategy course, the specifically that measurement marketing framework course. Not all of our strategy courses, but that one it does, because I think that it is important for companies to have that. So that's why we give that one away. It's about 3 hours, give or take, but absolutely worth going through. So even if you get the free version, this will help you. So you'll see those links shortly in the chat. All right. So now that you have strategy, let's talk about the mistakes. I want to cover these kind of high level because these are the ones that maybe you have already made, which is possible. And it's okay. Don't feel bad because everybody's doing it, right? Because there's a lot of signals and cross-contamination of what Google's been telling everybody. So we're gonna help with that. They're all good intentions. Don't be wrong. Nothing against Google. They're doing their best in a difficult situation. But we're going to talk about some of the stuff that's causing a lot of confusion, and then give you some things to make sure that you check. Number one, kind of again, high overview, but important stuff coming through. This one I want to talk about first because this is the newest thing. Many of you probably already got this email. If not, you will get another email. I am positive that will remind you about that. The reason I want to bring this up now is because this has a deadline of February 28th. February 28th. When you click on the Learn More button on this email, right, it's going to take you to, let me see, this page. Okay, so this page, what they're basically telling you, right, what this is based, and let me go back to the slide very quickly. What this looks like is friendly. Right? Not knowing anything about Google Analytics, I would be like, that's awesome. I don't have to do anything. That's how I would read this. There is not one person I have talked to, and I know all the instructors, practically all the instructors in the world, almost. And there's not one I've talked to and not one that I've heard from that reads it this way, right? So I'm gonna tell you how to actually read this. This is my suggestion on how to read this. This is like when I was a kid and my mom would come to me and say, I need you to clean your room. And I'd be like, yeah, I'll get around to it. And then the next day, hey, did you clean your room? No, I really need you to clean your room today. I'd be like, yeah, okay, I'll get around to it. And the next day, did you clean your room today? And I'd be like, no. And you know what would happen? She would escalate. And she would say, you know what? If you don't clean your room by tonight, I will clean it for you tomorrow. And you don't want that. And I would clean my room that night because I knew that the next day, if she cleaned my room, there'd be a bunch of stuff in the trash. Right? Ask me how I know. This is what happened. I'm like, okay, I mental note, never let your mom clean your room. This is Google saying, listen, if you don't clean up your room, we're going to clean it for you. If you don't take care of this, we're going to do it for you. But I promise you're not going to like what they do because they are taking an old platform with completely different rules and regulations and structure, and they're smashing it into this brand new platform. Imagine that old Model T truck, and they're going to disconnect it and they're going to try to reassemble it into a pickup that you saw. It's not going to work. It's going to cause epic confusion. It already is. So that's why I wanted to sort of mention that. Now, specifically, how is it going to do that? And by the way, I wanted to point this out because I think this is a huge tell. You see this? They say, hey, if you have Universal 360, you won't have this automatically happen, Why? Because you're paying us 150 grand and we don't want to upset you. But all the free accounts, we're going to make them do it. That's another way how you know, like, this is not really a great thing. Because if it was so good, why isn't Google doing it for the people that are paying them 150 grand a year, right? Because it's not good, because they know that those are complicated setups and they cannot automatically what they call migrate. Here, we'll talk about in a second. So that's one tell already, where I'm like, as soon as they did that, I was like, okay, this is not going to be great. Then they go through and they talk about how to do it. We are going to do this. That's what I'm going to recommend that you do, is opt out of this. But some of the stuff that they're doing is they're changing. Like, so those of you who have events that are coming through, and again, if you don't know what it is, don't worry about it at this point for Universal Analytics. But if you have events coming through that you've customized in your platform, they're automatically going to take what the action was for those and then make it the event name. It's going to screw up so many things. Right. So this is just one example of this stuff. Long story short, because we don't have a ton of time to go through this, this is not going to be, there is no cookie cutter solution to migrate. There is no cookie cutter solution to migrate, right? It's not a good idea to think about it. The number one mistake, in fact, that I have seen is this phrase, and I will say it, and you're going to see me say it again, but when people talk about, oh, I'm migrating to GA4. Migrating improves, you're moving from one to the other. And I get that. So it's not a bad word to use. It's just that it's being misinterpreted as, oh, I just switched from one to the other. Now, a lot of people are going through this because the old Google Analytics did that. They literally migrated from what they call classic to universal, and it got migrated. And it was like, oh, you just show up one day and it's better. Like, that's what happened. So that's what everybody thinks GA4 is going to be. It's like, oh, I'm just going to show up to analytics. It'll be my analytics, but better. It is not. It is a completely different platform, two different cars. They cannot smash one car into the other. You literally have to get out of one car and get into the other. So which means you've got to take all your data out of one car and put it all into the other. What I'm basically saying is the answer here is think about it like this. You have to rebuild in GA4. So you keep Universal doing its thing because it's completely disconnected from GA4. Remember, the older Google Analytics is called Universal Analytics. That stays where it is, and whatever that is, it is. It'll eventually go away anyway. You have to rebuild your measurement in a tool called GA4 because it has different rules. You want to take advantage of those fancy features. You don't want to drive this brand new fancy pickup truck like it was a Model T Ford. You don't want to be able to do that. You're not going to get anything from it. So that's why you should think about it, not just so much as migrating, which implies it's simple. You rebuild, which implies effort. And guess what? I would love to say it doesn't require effort. It does. But measurement is a department now, not a project. So a little bit of effort's okay. And the better you get at it, you start getting measurement muscle, and it becomes so much easier pretty quickly with some experience. So rebuilding in GA4. Let's take a look at some of the mistakes that people are doing when they are going through the rebuilds. So I'm going to go into our backend here. This is on our admin. The reason I wanted you to see ours is just because we have full permissions, right? So what I see here is as an admin, so it's what you should see. If anything's grayed out when you're looking at yours, it just means you don't quite have access to from a permission standpoint. Just have somebody upgrade your permissions, the users there. But the long and the short of it is, first thing I want to talk about is the setup assistant. So there are a lot of pop-ups that Google's doing, because think about it from Google's perspective. They got to get people using this tool. So they need to push them out of Universal, and they need to shoehorn them into GA4 is basically what's happening, however they can. So people are seeing pop-ups everywhere, and they're trying to connect. And it's always like, I need you to connect to a property, right? It's all these things about connected, setting up connections. You do not need to connect your property. In fact, I heavily discourage that. The only people that should be connecting properties are those that have done proprietary builds. If you're like Best Buy, as an example, like a huge enterprise, multi-international conglomerate type of company, where you have a development team of 50 people in the analytics department that has manually tagged everything, that's something that you might be able to do. But a small business, which is what most of us are, I would never do that, right? So the setup assistant, I'm not a huge believer of these wizards because they lead you in a wrong direction. I don't think it's good to blindly kind of go through there. The first thing I wanted to show though is the universal stuff, right? So I'm going to flip to our universal, and I want to show you how to opt out of this change, because what's going to happen is, and this is an important thing for you to check, because even if you've already started GA4, you still have to go back to your Universal Analytics properties and opt out, or they're going to create another GA4. Again, this is just one of the nightmare scenarios that will happen in March. And in March is when this is supposed to happen. So what you do is you'll come into the GA4 setup assistant that's in your universal property, right? And you can tell it's universal, A, because you have a view column here, but B, because it starts with UA dash, right? Anything that's just numbers is GA4. Anything that starts with UA is universal, the older version of Google Analytics. When you go to your GA4 setup assistant, you're going to scroll down right here. This will be toggled on by default. All of you, it's toggled on already. So they're automatically going to set this thing up for you in March, unless you do this. That tells them, I am telling you, Google, please do not clean my room. I've already cleaned my room. I don't need your help, right? So you would opt this out. Now, again, if we had this turned on, even though we already have our new platform here, they don't know that. So they're just going to recreate another one that I'm going to have to go in and delete anyway. So why do that? So I'm just going to take that out. So it's less. So that's one thing is to opt out of that little auto upgrade thing to just do that. So number one mistake would be not doing that with Universal. Now, going back into GA4, remember you're in GA4 because there's no views. That's how you can easily tell that third column goes away and the numbers are just there, no UA dash. So some things to point out in your, let me start with just general settings. As I come down into data settings, please check data retention. By default, it will be 2 months. Right? Which means user specific details, like if you're using any sort of user property, member level, anything like that, unique information that's about the user themselves, not quite personally identifiable information, but stuff that's specific to a user. This goes away after 2 months. It's just not going to be available. The aggregate data will, which means they're going to generalize it a lot, but you won't see specific details anymore. So I would flip it to 14 months if that makes sense for your company and your current compliance standards. Again, I cannot make compliance decisions for you. You should work with your team on that. But ours, we flip it to 14 months. And then make sure this is turned on. By default, this is turned on. Just make sure it is. Again, if it makes sense for your compliance policies. But this basically means like if you visited my site now and then you come back in 15 months, all of your stuff will be gone. But if you come back within the 14-month window, that clock starts over again, right? And so I can retain that data a little longer and get some usefulness out of it. So that's one thing I see, just people not knowing that's there, and they are all defaulted to 2 months without realizing it. So that's one thing. Let's see, go through some other stuff here in your data streams. So I'm going to go into, this is kind of unique to GA4. You create a data stream, and then in your data stream, you will see all these different widgets here. Again, measurement is a department. It is not a project. Here's another perfect example. This is new, form interactions. They did not have this 6 months ago. So if you installed Google Analytics, you got up and running, or Google Analytics 4, I should say, and it was running for you, all of a sudden, you're going to start seeing these form things show up because they defaulted it to on for everybody. But spoiler alert, the way that Facebook collects its data triggers this sometimes, depending on how your tech is, falsely. So we have had people that are like, I have 500 forms being filled out on my pages. What's going on? I don't even have a form on my page. And it's because of the Facebook pixel getting in the way, confusing Google Analytics 4, and it's firing all these form submits when they're not actually happening. So you just turn them off. Now, if you don't know that's a thing, it's already turned on by default because that's sort of what happens. So you might want to go there and turn those off. And if you happen to see a bunch of these form things and you're like, where is this coming from? I didn't do this. And you look at it, it says, hey, you got 500 form submits. But in your CRM, you see like 4 people. You're like, well, I'm clearly not getting that many leads. I would just turn this off because there's obviously a tech challenge here. So just turn it off so that you don't keep that anymore. You'll also notice that some of ours are turned off here. Some of them are turned on. That's because we use Tag Manager. So the other big mistake people will make is they use 2 different things to implement Google Analytics 4. We use Tag Manager. So if we are already using Tag Manager, you stick with using Tag Manager for GA4 implementation, and you don't let GA4 do its own. You don't use what they call the Google tag, which is the script. And I'll show you that in a second. If you were just using this script, then you would not use Tag Manager, right? You're just going to use the script until you eventually move in the Tag Manager, and then you just 100% you're in Tag Manager. The moral of the story, one method to implement Google Analytics. If I come in here and I turn these on, Google Analytics 4, literally from the second I save this, Google Analytics 4 will start recording scroll and outbound clicks, in addition to what my Tag Manager is recording. So I will duplicate things. And I've seen that a lot. People are duplicating stuff everywhere. So just choose one method for your implementation. So Tag Manager handles our scrolls. Tag Manager handles our clicks. We let GA4 handle the site search stuff. Tag Manager handles our forms. We let GA4 do video engagement, and we let GA4 do file downloads. But we'll eventually move these, and then that will go away, and this will go away, and they'll both be in Tag Manager's hands, right? So just some ideas of making sure you are aware of this and that this changes, and they might not realize that they've added these new features back there for you. So you have those. Now, in your tag settings, let's talk about that very briefly. One, the tag instructions. So I want to show those to you. This is where you can go and you can grab your script. This is what they call the Google tag, right? This is the Google tag. And then there's tag manager, Google tag manager, two different things. So the Google tag is just the script. Tag manager is a platform that will manage that for you, right? Which is what ultimately you move into as you get more advanced, or at least a little bit of experience. But this tag, you can just copy this, paste this on your page. You can use plugins. They'll actually help you find them now. You can put in your site and it'll say, oh, I'm a WordPress site. And it gives you some examples. But remember, one method. Don't use the Monster Insights plugin and use the script and have Tag Manager, or all three are going to be duplicating. They don't know about each other. So they're just throwing it into the database and nothing's going to get duplicated. All of a sudden, your traffic number is going to look awesome, but that's only because you've got bad data. So just pick one method and that's it when you're coming through here. Now, under the tag settings, I wanted to show you some stuff that you might not know is there. So when you come through here, you have your settings. So you have configured domains, you got allow properties. I want to talk about this one because it's confusing. They have the exact same stuff here as they had in that other part I showed you, right? On the data stream. This part, they're all turned on here, right? And that's okay. Because what this does, this is kind of like a global permissions. This means our GA4 can collect this stuff. Not that it is collecting this stuff. It just means it has permissions to be able to do it. And then we have to come in here to the enhanced measurement. And this is where you say, yes, please do it. Right. So only the ones with these little check marks here like this, on this side, this, what they call enhanced measurement, that's what actually makes the difference. We've seen people come in here and try to turn things on and off there, and it doesn't work for them. So more permission level stuff. Other fun things that are here. If you go to show more, you scroll down, you can put in your unwanted referrals, referral exclusions for those that are familiar with that. Cross domain gets set up right here for those that are familiar with that. And if you're not, don't worry about it. Session timeout. So this is if you want to do session timeout, also is available. And including, this is a cool thing with GA4, big difference between the older universal, and then we're going to wrap this up, I promise, between GA4 and the older universal is the older universal analytics did not know how to tell time at all. It wasn't built for it. It had no idea that a second had ever passed. It just had no idea how to do that. It was guessing the entire time. GA4 is 100% aware of time. It knows every single second you're on the page. So you can tell it, listen, I want you to record it as an engaged session if they've been here for 10 seconds or up to 60 seconds. So depending upon your business model, you might not want an engaged session to be 10 seconds. I personally find 10 seconds to be perfectly fine for most digital marketers. But if you have a longer video or just you want them to spend more time on your site before you consider them quote unquote engaged, then you can expand that. It is a very useful setting here to be able to do that. Just want to make sure you're aware of it because they kind of hide it. You have to click this, show all, and then you'll see that it's in there. And again, this was a setting in Universal Analytics. Now, the other thing here, you see collect Universal Analytics events. If that is turned on, here's what it's trying to do. It is trying to grab your existing code, assuming that you're not using Tag Manager, but if you use the regular old Universal Analytics script, it's trying to grab what's there, read it, and repurpose it, and then smash that data into GA4. And that's how I like to think about it. They are smashing it in there, right? It's not built for it. They're just going to twist it around, and they're literally putting, at least from a data perspective, they're putting a round peg into a square hole. That's what they're trying to do. So the collecting Universal Analytics event, I have seen this turned on because it feels like the good thing to do. But then again, what starts happening is people have duplicate events because now they've got different codes, all doing different things. Everything starts firing duplicated. So I personally recommend not doing this. You should just rebuild it from scratch, just like you were using a completely different analytics platform, like, Matomo or Pickwick or Clicky or Kissmetrics, right? Any of these other analytics platforms, just treat it like a brand new separate platform. You will get better results from it. So that's kind of the high level on some of the mistakes that have been back here. Couple other things just to be aware of. So when you go to reporting identity, you can turn on and off modeling in here, blended data. You also have the ability to just do cookies. If you wanted to, you could do that. So just again, some things to be aware of. But other than that, I want to go too far down the rabbit hole. I'm happy to go into a deeper dive with any of this stuff during the Q&A because I see a ton of questions. I want to be able to get to them here as we go through. So One tool that we do call it a migration planner. This is only because that's what everybody calls it. And if I called it the rebuilder, nobody would know what I'm talking about. That's just me kind of bending to the will of the market here. But we do have a migration planner. It is free to you. Anybody that has the free account of the Academy, it is sitting back there in the toolbox already. So you'll have access to that. So now that you know some common GA4 mistakes, I want to kind of just reemphasize what we just covered. We talked about getting familiar with GA4. You know why they did it. You know, they basically it's outdated, the old one, and they have to rebuild from scratch. So should you. We know about the best practices. You can use that tool. If you're just using Google Analytics right now, you can still get really good measurement with just GA4 right now. If you are already using Tag Manager and Looker Studio, definitely continue to use those, just now with GA4 instead, but you should have the skills for that if you're using those tools already. And eventually you probably will use those tools, but it doesn't mean that you have to start using everything all at once because it's way too much. Get good at GA4 first if you're just starting out, then add in Tag Manager later. And then we talked about migration mistakes. You never want Google to clean your room. They're going to take your data, they're going to make their best guess, and they're going to smash it in there for you. And they'll be like, hey, this is yours to figure out. And it's going to be messy, kind of like if I gave you a kid's book and I said, hey, here's a kid's book to go to Locked into the Three Bears, you could probably read that just fine. But if I take that book away, rip out the pages, rip those into a bunch of pieces, smash those pieces between the book cover, hand the book back to you with all those ripped up pieces of paper and say, cool, read me the story now. Could you? Now you might be thinking, well, no, I could never read that story. And I would be like, really? Did I just change your ability to read? No, of course not. You can absolutely read the story. It's just going to be hard. Right? It's going to take you a while. You're going to get in there and be like, I have no idea what this is trying to tell me. Sound familiar with numbers? I have no idea what it's trying to tell me. I have to dump all this stuff out and I got to try to piece it together and decode the matrix of this kid's book. That's what it's going to feel like. So when you do measurement properly, it's like all the pages are put together for you already. So it's easier to read the story. If you let Google do it, they're going to give you a bunch of ripped up pieces of paper. And then it won't be your fault that you can't read anything, but it's also not going to be useful. So why let them do it in the first place? All right. Let's talk briefly about the Academy. I wanted to show some people and then we'll go into some Q&A here. When you come in, so this is, if you're in I'm showing the paid account, the upgraded account here, because I want you to show the parts and pieces, but I do want to talk about the free stuff because I want to emphasize the value that's back here. Again, I'm biased, don't get me wrong, but I think it's a lot of value. So when you come in, you'll have access to the toolbox and this on-demand workshops section here. The toolbox has these tools. So what you're looking at now is what you would also have ability to get. So for those of you who are a little more advanced, you know, Google Analytics, the BigQuery, the Store Map, there's our migration planner. So you can grab that tool, basically a checklist to make sure that you've thought about everything as you rebuild from one platform into the other. There's regular analytics stuff, customer journey stuff, dashboard toolkits, optimization pipelines. There's forecasting things back here. There's traffic tracking toolkits. A lot of tools. These are for our members, right? So you would have access to that. Even as a free Toolbox member of the Academy, you get access to that. In the on-demand workshops, excuse me, let me go back. In the on-demand workshop section, it just gives you weekly training that you have access to. So if you wanted to have access to, you know, new workshops that are back here to sort of stay up to date, we give you access to that. We actually have those on our YouTube channel as well. So you're more than welcome to get them there if that makes more sense for you. The difference here is that you just don't have the tools. If you just use YouTube, you don't have access to the tools. So if you want the tools, that's why I would do the free account personally. So that's that. Next, let's talk about the other sections that you would have access to as a paid user. So if you upgrade, right, and I would personally recommend the annual edition because, again, measurement's a department. You want to stay up to date. You unlock all these, what we call WIN courses. WIN stands for what I need. We are very focused on our courses. So we try to make them as bite-sized as possible, but still as in-depth as needed. So you'll have WIN. There's an entire course for just how to set up Google Analytics 4. You can see there's an entire course on the basics of using Google Analytics 4 coming through. And then there's going to be another course that we're recording in early March that is around the beyond basics, the more advanced stuff for GA4. So eventually you're going to need it, not today, but eventually it'll be there for you. So we have courses over Google Analytics. We've got courses over Tag Manager, again, basics and beyond basics. Same thing with Looker Studio if you want to learn that platform. Not to mention this other stuff, other tools you might come across, you know, Google Sheets, how to think about stuff, the strategy stuff. By the way, this is the course, Win the Measurement Marketing Framework, that you will have access to as a free member. You will have access to this one course, but there's all these other ones back here, how to plan, how to optimize, how to forecast, right? So there's a lot of stuff back here in terms of strategy, you know, and this is the part as a marketer you're not supposed to say, but it is a lot of hours of courses. But the reason that's there is not because you're supposed to go through it all. It's that when you are ready, your training will be there. It will, whatever skill you need to pick up at the time you need it, there'll be a course for you to help you there. right? Because it's designed to help grow with you as you grow. So that's the win courses. Other sections you'll have access to, you've got the Ask Instructor support. This is kind of our claim to fame, because let's face it, you can watch a lot of stuff on YouTube. I did when I was starting out, but that's only because a place like this didn't exist. But you can also, in our case, you have Ask Instructor support, because how many times you've watched a video and you go, well, that didn't quite work for me, and there's no one to talk to. Here, you can put in your question, you can drop in videos and screenshots, which we highly recommend, and just sort of walk the instructor through what's going on. It then goes back to our instructor team, who are made up of people who use these tools every day for our clients and for their clients, right? So they are using them every day for marketing purposes. In other words, they get you, and they will watch your videos, and then they will go like, okay, cool, here's what it is. And they will write a video or create a video and give it back to you that says, hey, all right, Mercer, here's what's going on. You really need to click on this. And the reason we want to click on this button is because it does, and they're teaching me how to fish as they are giving me the fish in this case. But they're teaching me as well to make sure that I have the skill, right? So Ask Instructor support is huge. There are a lot of people who have a lot of really nice things to say about our instructors. They build relationships with them coming through. Now, finally, and this is the thing this is going to be my selfish little pitch here, but when you join the annual edition of the Academy, you'll get this measurement mastermind as a bonus for the first 90 days. This is something that you get access to, that you can come into. It's Wednesdays at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. But a group of us get together. It's typically between 20 and 30 people. And it is measurement professionals, meaning people who are in this as a business. Like, measurement is their business. That's what they do. And they're all getting together talking about stuff. And there's some beginners there as well, beginners like yourself, who are there to see kind of what's possible, and then also to get help and talk things out. And then the experts that are in the room, besides our instructors, right, just other people that are there, other members, help each other out. So they can help you out. You can talk things out on a screen share that we don't have to worry about, the delay of sending a video back and forth. You can get real-time help. And just being a fly in the room is fascinating, because I kid you not, at a certain point, you just have to be like, I'm done. I can't learn every single thing. And that's where I am right now. I can't learn every single tool that's out there. It's too much. So some of these individuals have gone down really understanding certain tools where even I don't understand what they're doing, but I get it. I just don't know how to do what they're doing, but I know they can do it. I understand the strategies, and I can reach out to them to get additional help if I needed it. So it helps me future-proof. It's an incredible group to make sure your skills are up to date, because remember, measurement's a department, not a project anymore. So just again, call to action for that. So that links, I believe, are in the chat where you can find those as well. And with that, so I want to thank you for that. Let's go on to questions. So I will put those in here. And I think I've got one slide with those links. There we go. Okay. So Kurt, do you want to talk us through some questions here?
Sounds amazing. You want to turn your camera on so we can see your beautiful face?
I will, just because you asked so nicely. All right, there we go. And I'm going to stop my screen share here and then I'll start it. I guess I will keep it on some pause. I'm going to have to use it. So we'll show.
Okay, so Sue has a question. Mm-hmm. So one issue that I've had with GA attribution and traffic that comes from via ManyChat, so messenger funnels. Any ideas how to solve this with the GA4?
To know how it comes from ManyChat, I would UTM the links. So for example, if you click, this is a selfish plug, I guess. I'm not trying to trick anybody, but click on the links that are in chat that Nick and team put in there. When you click on them, in fact, I'm just going to do it so you can see it. So I'm going to click on the link, bring it over. So watch, there's my click on the toolbox, right? What just happened is it redirected, and now we're using UTMs. This is for me, because this is now going to my measurement systems that's on my page. This is for the free account, by the way. So now it's telling me they came from Infusionsoft. It came from, what's the type of traffic? Partner traffic. Thank you, Kurt and team. And then what's the purposes? Well, it's for the purposes of the Academy user journey, right? And then we have some other specifics, like how I know which specific they came from the free resources link that were put out, all the way down to the specific affiliate. So we're grabbing that information. That's kind of how you could do it with ManyChat. There's different ways to get this done, as with all things. But if you use the short link that was UTM'd, that said, oh, it redirected and it says, oh, this came from ManyChat. That's a way to do it. There's other ways as well, but that's how you could do it. And then it would identify there was ManyChat sending you the traffic coming through. Good question.
Perfect. Another question from Sue. So slightly confused about not using Google Tag Manager to collect at first. Mostly it's already installed.
Totally. If it's already, if it's, so installed is a weird phrasing. So if you are actively using Tag Manager, I'm going to rephrase that a little bit. If you're actively using Tag Manager, continue using Tag Manager. You don't stop using Tag Manager. Once you're there, it's sort of like you've leveled up, you just keep doing it, right? If you are not using Tag Manager, and that was the point of that little talk, if you're not using Tag Manager, don't think you have to use Tag Manager today. You will eventually grow into it if that's you, right? But if you're just starting out, if you're a person going, man, I heard about this Tag Manager and Looker Studio, this stuff is complicated. I'm here to tell you, yes, it is. So that's okay. It is. And just use GA4 right now. Get good at that. You can do a lot of stuff with that platform. It is definitely more useful than Universal Analytics was ever. But it requires a learning curve and practice. So learn that platform first, and then eventually you grow into Tag Manager, and then eventually you grow into Looker Studio. And again, just to emphasize, if you have already grown into using Tag Manager, then you don't grow out of it. You stay in it and you just keep using it. So hopefully that makes sense.
So just to double check, I know you talked about this, but from a high level view, so let's just say someone's working with a client, and the client, like your mom, like you were talking about your mom cleaning your room. I love that story. Completely relate to that. If they don't do anything on February 28th, right? They just let it go by. What's some things that people can expect may or may not
Great
happen?
question. Let me show you. So if I go back into my Google Analytics, every single one of these Universal Analytics properties, this one is going to, if I don't opt out, which I believe this one I have, this one will have a new GA4 property. This one would have a new GA4 property if it's not deleted. That's why we're deleting some cleaning stuff up on our end too, right? All the stuff that's in there would have a new GA4 property. So I already have a GA4 property. They're going to create another one that I have to now get rid of. At the very least for us, it would just be busy work. It'd be unnecessary busy work. What I fear is that there's a lot of individuals, maybe some on this call, who are not yet using GA4. So they just have Universal because, let's face it, it's been working. So it's not stopped working. And I know what, I get it. It's like, hey, if it's working, it's not really urgent. You know, it's important. I get it, but it's not urgent yet. It's going to be an urgent thing, because what will happen is you will all of a sudden wake up in March, someday in March is when the timeline, most current truth, that's what it's supposed to be. And you're going to have a GA4 account. Then you go, oh, okay, they've migrated me. Hey, that was great. And that's what they did. They migrate. They pushed that data and smashed it in there. You're going to get into GA4 and you're going to be like, what is this? I have no idea how to use this. And that's probably what's going to happen. And then you go like, well, this is a mess. And it is a mess. And then you're going to feel like it's your fault that you can't figure out what is this platform that should be simple to figure out, but it's not going to be, because they did not create the account and they did not configure the account. They just smashed the old car into the new car, and they made it your problem to figure out, because they get to say, well, everybody migrated. Look at us. Everybody loves GA4, which again, I don't fault them for, because they have to. They don't have a choice. They have to give you something. But that's my point of like, you don't want your mom cleaning your room because she's going to throw stuff out. At least my mom was. So you don't want Google cleaning your data because they're going to throw stuff out. They're going to not do it correctly because they can't know what you need. So they cannot configure anything properly. So if it's not configured, it's going to be a bunch of ripped up pieces of paper that you have to try to make a story out of. You're not going to be able to do that. It's just not going to happen. So then you go, well, this platform sucks. And then you try to go to the next new tool and the next new tool. And then you're caught up in the cycle that everyone's going to be caught up in. But if you know better, you go, okay, this is my warning. I got to clean my room. Let's get this thing started. Let's learn this stuff. Let's make measurement of the department, give it some resources. Then you're off to the races, and you can avoid that whole nightmare and get a lot of usefulness. This platform, like, let me just very quickly show you some of our events that are back here. Just some of the conversions that we have, right? These are the quote unquote goals, right? They don't call them goals, they call them conversion events. But I measure when somebody's aware of the Academy customer journey. We measure when they've completed it. We measure as they engage along the way. I measure when they are load the page, when they're there. This is 10 seconds later. This is when they scroll plus 45 seconds. This is when they click on the buttons. This is when they look at the button for a period of 5 seconds. Like, think about the stuff you can do with Google Analytics 4. Here's a different journey. This is the free journey that we have for what we call the toolbox version of the Academy, when they're aware, when they complete, when they engage. So it's super easy for me to come in here. And again, from a marketing standpoint, I come in here, I go to my reports, because remember this 10,000 foot view. I come into acquisition. I say, okay, how is my traffic working? I go to traffic acquisition. And I sit and I say, okay, let's go to the source medium coming through. I know I'm going through this quickly, I realize, but just to show you the power of some of this, I'm going to pull up the campaign and I'm going to say, I want to see everything that's my Academy traffic. How is all of my traffic working for the Academy? Here it is. Here's my Infusionsoft email for the Academy, my YouTube social traffic for the Academy, my paid Google traffic for the Academy, the Facebook paid traffic for the Academy, right? And the Infusionsoft, et cetera, et cetera. I have all this stuff coming through, and I can tie it to specific results. And then I can start to say like, okay, how many helped to engage? Actually, let's change this to aware so you can kind of see the stair step. So I'm just going to say Academy here. So Academy aware. How many of those traffic sources made people aware of the Academy as we're measuring it? Which one's better? And I can start to figure that out. How many of those actually helped to engage, right? As I come through, how many engaged? So that might be like seeing the cart view or something like that. How many of those actually helped to complete the deal? And then you can flip it and say, okay, how many people completed the deal? And remember, certain traffic sources have certain jobs. That's kind of a beauty of marketing that I wish more marketers understood. There is no such thing as Facebook traffic. There's a specific ad from the platform called Facebook. There's a specific ad from Google that has, and those ads should have unique little marching orders. And this is how we can break it down and say, this ad was supposed to do this thing, did it. And then it triggers this ad, which is supposed to do this thing. And then did it do that as they move the users through the user journey. This is how you can see it in this platform. But Google migrating you will never get close to this. And you're going to have to scrape, and you'll eventually have to delete it and start over anyway, because it'll be so messy looking. So that's what I fear, is that they're going to just migrate. And that's why they're not doing it for paid accounts, because they don't want to screw up their customers. So, but the free accounts are like, whatever. Free accounts suffer, right? Like that's kind of what it is.
A question for you. Michael has a question here. He's absolutely brilliant. He's been online marketing probably about 15, almost 20 years, probably 20 years at this point. He's been a member of a lot of our different groups and asks a brilliant question just because he's been doing this a long time. So he has 92 sites. Can GA4 tag all of our sites and do cross-site reporting? Do they still have to create multiple properties like with UA? What does that look like?
So great question. It depends on the answer to the multiple sites question is always, it depends. But what it depends on is, do you care? Think about it from an attribution standpoint. So let's say using Facebook as Facebook, the ad on Facebook sends traffic to your site. Then they crisscross through other sites. And then the result is on site 92, let's say. Do you want to tie that end result of 90 on site 92 all the way back to Facebook ad? If you do, you have to set up what they call cross domain. Everything has to be in one property. Now, the beauty of GA4, you can do multiple data streams. So maybe there's some things you can do with that. But you can probably just use the same data stream. That said, 92 sites feels like a lot. So that's probably not designed so that a user has to crisscross through 92 different domains in a standard journey. So I would probably group those. And there might be a feeder site. So maybe there's a lot of brochure sites that feed into a main site. So I see a lot of brochure sites that are created and they all feed into the Shopify store or something like that. If that's what's happening, then you probably would need that. But you're not trying to measure the crisscross between all 92. You're trying to measure the crisscross between this type of site and then do they go into the store and eventually purchase. But so you would have to include them all on the same property, only if you want to see the crisscross between them. Now, if you're not asking that, right? If you don't care about attributing back to Facebook or whatever the traffic source is, then you don't need to set that up and you can keep them all in separate siloed properties. I would mostly think that's only if they are completely different brands and there is no reason to crisscross. Not like a sister company relationship, because I get that. It's like, hey, it's a sister company. If they buy, that's fine, but it's not, I don't want to associate company A's Facebook ad with the sister company's results, right? Because it's company A's budget, it's different company. So if there's separation in the brands, I would keep them separate. But if they're just like 92 different sites that are all for the same brand, trying to get people to move through the thing, you can measure them all in GA4, no problem.
I'm going to go back to Sue real quick because she had a question. Remember, we were talking about ManyChat. So completely understand the UTM. She used UTMs. The problem is it sounds like that when they're running an ad, get the UTM, but there's keywords that are triggered inside the JSON link or JSON link, whatever you want to say that.
Link,
that's triggered as links, so they're problematic. So would you happen to know any other way? She said as a laugh, she went to ChatGPT Pro, but obviously this is too new of a question, so she figured maybe you know
only
more
up through 2021 can you get
GPT
the answers
Pro.
there.
Hang on a second. Hey. Maybe you know more than ChatGPT Pro. That's all we're saying, right?
Yeah, I'd have to see that in action, to be honest. So I don't make assumptions of what's going on with the JSON links that she's talking about. Typically, the UTMs and the redirects would work. I don't know what the interference thing is. But if I could see it, if you want to send me a video of that issue, Sue, just email me, Mercer at measurementmarketing.io. And I'm happy to take a look. Just put in the subject line, like, from Kurt's webinar or something. That goes for anybody that's got questions. I'll help you out. But put in the subject line, like from Kurt's webinar, so I know that it was for that. And I'll take a look. But send me a video of the exact issue. That'll make it easier for me to see. Be like, oh, okay, here's what we're talking about. That way I don't make assumptions here.
So somebody had a question when you're talking about the course, and I believe this is how much time does it take to go through what time does the strategy course to get through? So how much time does it take to
how much time for the strategy?
course?
So the measure marketing framework is 3 hours and 18 minutes right there. So what it looks like when you come in, all of our courses are organized like this. And just as a pro tip, like for Academy members, as you upgrade, we teach the courses live a lot of the times. So we'll send out an announcement to all the Academy members, say, hey, we're going to be updating this course or teaching a new course, and people can join live and get help that way too. We have a lot of live human touch points. I think that's what separates us out. So here's the foundations, kind of shows you the foundations of the framework. Then we talk about the stages of the framework, which I did not talk about, but is super important. So how to deal when you're just starting out, how to use the framework when you've got a little bit more experience, which what we call the valley visibility, and then how to use the framework again, but now you're an advanced user, and how do you unlock it now at this level? So it kind of walks through the different stages that you'll use it. So when you watch this course, you can just go through it and practice some of the steps, but you'll at least have a context for how measurement can then dictate what the tools that you're using and how you should be using those tools. And then your measurement all of a sudden becomes a lot more useful. But there you go. It's a good question.
So we talked about GA4 kind of like Facebook Cappy, just meaning that like when it first came out, everyone's like, what do you do? And I remember Facebook wrote us. I remember you and I talking about this. Facebook wrote us and said, hey, we're going to help your clients get this installed. We're going to give them a $10,000 developer. And we're like, you're going to give our clients $10,000. Everyone else has no idea what to do. So someone had asked a really great question. So far, what I'm seeing implementing on GA4 is relatively complex for most e-com platforms. In comparison to UA, where many platforms just allow you to easily enter in your UA code, it seems that GTM is just a requirement for setting up, the G4 properties. So on a lot of these properties, like I know Shopify, which I know Shopify is coming out with something pretty soon, and Subly, am I missing something? Is there something an easier way to implement GA4?
There's not, because everybody got caught off guard. Everybody did the same thing. They're all like, yeah, eventually one day we're going to do it. Because keep in mind, this GA4 thing has been around for 4 years. 3 years.
Oh,
right? 3 years, a long time. We've been using this thing since it was called App and Web, and then it was Web and App and Web Plus App and all the other. Then they renamed it to Google Analytics 4, I think about 2 years ago, right? And that's when they started making the push. And they were like, it's eventually going away. Universal's going away. And everybody just sat there, including Shopify, who again got caught off guard because I don't know why they didn't see this come. This should already be done, in my opinion, right? But who am I, right? Shopify's not hiring me. But the idea is that they didn't not know this was coming. They just chose not to worry about it until it was fully cooked, I think is probably what they were thinking, which I understand because they had priorities. They were dealing with all the growth from the pandemic. If you think about it, they were probably just trying to keep the servers working at that point. So they didn't care. But this is what's happening. So they are getting on the ball finally. And so by March of 2023, they will have an integration. So will everybody else. Monster Insights already does a plugin with GA4 that integrates it. So if you use WordPress plugins, again, not using Tag Manager automatically did this even 3 or 4 years ago. It automatically did it. So that was covered if you're using Tag Manager. But like if you're using a plugin on WordPress, there are WordPress plugins that do it already. If you have a WooCommerce store, there are WooCommerce plugins that do it. So there's a lot of integrations. It's the platforms that are the problem, like Shopify. Because they were just caught off guard by the sunsetting announcement like everybody else was last year. And it just took them a while to get it in. But the thing is, Google Analytics is the big giant, like forget 800-pound gorilla. It's like the 80,000-pound gorilla. It's the thing that everybody uses. So they don't have a choice. They will have to have an integration because otherwise, and this is what I love doing. I love telling people, go to the support team and say, hey, where is the GA4 integration? Not, are you going to have one? You assume they already did it.
They already have it.
And that way they go, oh crap, there's somebody else that's trying to, like, they're starting to get irritated, people. And then all of a sudden, as a feature request, it starts getting higher and higher. So I would do that with whatever platform people are using if they can't find it, to say, where is it? Not do you have one? Where is it? And then they start going, oh, we really got to get this going, which is what Shopify did. So, but they all will have them. They all will have them. Because they were. I
remember just kind of to add to that point. I remember years ago when I was in real estate, we went to go lobby the state capital of Texas. And I'll never forget this. Basically, they said, look, we're going to get a group of people to go inside each one of these legislators' offices and say, hey, we have a problem with this real estate thing. Yep. And the lobbyist told us, did you know that if you walk into a senator's office or if they get more than 10 phone calls on one subject, it is a high priority subject that gets shot up the chain. So literally, if everyone on this call mentioned to Shopify and sent them an email exactly what you're talking about, jumps it all the way to the top to get that done.
I love that.
Which is just crazy. A couple other questions. This is a really good one. Should agencies just do this as a part of a service at no charge? Or lots of companies out there need this. It's going to take some work to set up. Should agencies just be setting this up? Or is this another revenue stream for agencies? Because right now it really is just such a mess.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for ethics, I don't ethically for sure. Like there's no question on the ethics part of it because they need help, right? And measurement is a department now. In fact, we are an outsourced measurement department for many companies ourselves. We have a whole done for you system that we do. So we've been doing that for 10 years, give or take, right? So yes, is the short answer. We've gone through certification. We have a certification program that we teach companies to actually do that. Not only how to measure, but actually how to sell it and how to build a measurement business. And we've got lots of people who have done that. So some of you might be familiar with Ahmad Kanani. He was one of our original certification members 5 years ago. I think we started that program. JJ Reynolds over Better Than Data has done that program. Julian over at Measure School has done that program. So it's like there's lots of people that we have certified to do exactly this work. So yeah,
Nick's done the program as well.
Nick's done the program. Absolutely right. You guys did it. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So
and it should be a profit center. I don't think you should give it for free personally. If I was a traffic agency, but the payoff is if I set up your measurement, then I keep you longer for retention. So that's where the win would be. So I'm still kind of charging but I'm improving the retention of the client because I can better explain what's happening to their money and what the results are and giving them guidance. And why would they ever get rid of me as a traffic person if I can do that? So
yeah, I think unequivocally, I would charge for the service because you have paid traffic, paid ads, and that's what you're paid to do. Google Analytics is to help you steer you in the right direction. But if you have to set up GA4 and you have to figure out all the goals and everything else and attend webinars like this, absolutely sign up for it. So, or charge clients for it. Guillermo asked a question: when are you launching your next certification tracking course, and where can you learn more about that? Will cover all the GA4 stuff. You know he's taken it before.
Yeah, good question. The short answer is I don't know. We were thinking about doing one in March. We might postpone that one a little bit because now I want to get through this GA4 sort of Armageddon phase. And so probably in summer, I would imagine we're going to do it after Universal goes down and stops working in July 1st. So somewhere around there, we'll have at least one class this year for sure. But normally we do 2 a year, but I think this year we're just going to do the one. But that's not because demand's not there. It's just because I didn't want to teach it right now with so much stuff flying around. And we've got the academy and everything else. So we're going to be doing a course, for example. One way we're solving that is we're doing a win course. It's not out yet. And it's not going to be out till the summer, but it's scheduled. We're going to do a course on how to build a measurement business. And that'll be in the strategy section because there is a need for that. But I didn't feel like certification is a high ticket program. And there's a lot of people who just can't afford that high ticket. It was a 10K program for us. So for people that couldn't afford that, but I was like, well, there just needs to be people out there knowing how to do this. So that's why we're going to put it in the win course and kind of do it that way and then focus on academy sales. Just from a business standpoint, that's why we're doing that.
So two quick things. I still have some other questions that I'm going through, so don't worry, we'll get through all the questions. Sue basically just pointed out, Shopify should hire you, Chris. That would help with everyone. Heck, you're just the GOAT. So, which is awesome to see.
Thank you for that, Sue.
Teresa asks, what kind of, I just had it in here. We'll send out the recording here. We'll edit it up. We'll send out over the recording. I see there's a couple other questions in here that I will absolutely get to. What's a good budget for the measurement department? So what cost should be anticipated to bring on a measurement department? So she's running an agency on her own. Does she hire someone to help do this? Does she have someone part-time kind of look at stats? Like as an agency, what should she be thinking about budgeting that, or the advice that she could offer to her clients for like, hey, we really should budget for this person for time or information for this department?
Yeah, it's a good idea. Great question. So I think, obviously it's a hard answer because it sort of depends on everybody's situation and budgets and clients and where they are cash flow wise. I could tell you like to hire us, like we are very selective on the clients we work with just because we can be, that's the only reason. But our case is it's 5K a month retainer. We only work with people who want to work with us for years because we are their department. They're not trying to build a department. They use us as their department, and it's cheaper to hire us for 60K a year than it is to hire somebody that knows their stuff for 150K, right? It's just half as much and you get a lot more because we have an entire team plus all the experience we come with. So that's sort of our pitch on that. If I was an individual, I'm gonna go the opposite route. If I'm an individual owner of an agency, a one-person shop, and I've got a few clients, I'm going to be biased for sure, but this is what I would do. I would get the academy. I would go through the strategy sections because you got to understand strategy, even as the owner. Even if you're not the person setting up GA4, you have to understand what it can do and why and how to use it so you can direct that person to do it. Then, if you understand that part, you could hire somebody on Upwork and say, this is what I want to happen, because now your strategy is dictating the tool, so you could have a minimal budget, as opposed to hiring somebody who knows measurement marketing, because they will be expensive. They just will. It's because they know strategy and the tool. But if you know the strategy, you can the implementer part right? The person who's just sort of connecting the wires. If you're directing them, that they should be cheaper because they're not self-directed. And then eventually, like we have something called the Academy for Agencies and Teams that's multi-seat, which I think is what you guys have. So they can come in and then you can eventually, if you brought on a VA or something like that, you could give them access to the Academy, have them watch the courses. And I'll be honest, if you just have your own sign-in, share it. I don't care. Get the information out. Have your VA go through the courses, and you can have them go through the strategy so that they kind of get it. But you're still going to be the strategy person. But then you tell them, go watch the how to set up Google Analytics 4 course. And if you have problems, go ask their instructors. And then your job is to make sure they do it. Because a lot of, especially VAs, they don't like asking questions sometimes. And so make sure that you're following up with them and that they are taking advantage, whether you use us or somebody else. I want to say it's just us. I would love it if you used us, but don't get me wrong, whatever resource it is, just make sure you're following up with them to like, did you ask them? Did you get help? Are you asking, to solve that problem? Because they're going to need it. They're not going to be able to figure it out on their own. Nobody can. We can't. I work with my team constantly. We're like, what are we doing now? And all the other certified measurement marketers, we get together once a week. We're like, okay, what are we doing? The measurement mastermind. We're all back to going, here's the latest change that just happened yesterday. There was one that came out 2 hours before the call yesterday. We're like, what are we doing with this? So it's constantly what that is, which is why it does need resources and time. But start at where you are. I'm a big believer in get good enough to get going. Don't worry about perfect. Just get good enough. So if you start focusing on strategy, understand it, you can use Upwork or Fiverr, and you're dictating very clearly what the implementation is because you know the strategy. That'll be a cheap way in. And then eventually, as you get more cash flow, bring on people, you can then focus a little bit more training budget, and then I would ramp it up at that point.
So to go along with this is to make it really simple, right? So we have somebody on here who's a beginner in tracking and they just set up their site and basically they want to use it as an affiliate site, run some traffic to the ads too. What's the easiest thing to get started with? Some of the free tools, what's some of the first things that they can get started on their own personal journey of understanding this whole measurement?
For sure, sign up for the free account. For sure, Toolbox. I honestly would start with that no matter what. Don't even look at GA4 until you get through the framework course. Just because it puts everything in context, it makes GA4 easier to think through.
That makes sense.
Once you've done that, then you just install Google Analytics 4 and you'll get into it and start using it. And you'll already have a little bit of a strategy mindset of how you would want to use it. And because you are asking questions and you're collecting the information, you're determining what it needs to collect, and you can set it up to collect that information so you can take the actions you want to take, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as you go through the framework. But I would just be like, get good enough to get going. Don't come up with reasons why it's too complicated, because it is complicated, but it's at the level. It's like, just because the mountaintop is way up here doesn't mean you don't take the first step from base camp, right? So just take that first step, get that initial progress going, and then it gets easier as you go, because as you get experience, you're gaining muscle. Like once you learn, for example, something very simple, but let's say once you learn how to put the code of GTag, that Google tag code, on your pages or through a plugin, if that's what you're doing, you never have to learn that again. You know how to do that. You've got muscle now. Once you set up your first event in GA4, you've got muscle now. You don't have to learn that again. Once you learn how to use a report in GA4, you got muscle now. Once you learn UTMs in GA4, you got muscle now. And the next time you come back, you're coming at it with that more muscle so you can get a little bit further on the climb. And that's how you get good at these tools. Don't try to rush it. Give yourself at least 90 days to get good at the tool. Not great, but good. And you'll be better than most people around you for sure. But give yourself at least 90 days to practice it.
Here's another question here's a question from Elaine that it's about Google My Business. Will GA4 have an effect on Google My Business?
No, it shouldn't, because it's just measuring stuff. So it shouldn't.
Yeah.
It's just measuring stuff. Yeah. Completely separate platform. Just like Universal shouldn't affect Google My Business because Universal just measures stuff. It shouldn't measure it.
Yeah. Now I'm going to read this word from Michael. He has a really great question. Way over my head, too smart for me. So I'm going to read this like a third grader, and you're going to understand the words that I'm just coming out of my mouth. Right.
All right. Here we go.
One, for WordPress, do you have a preferred implementation of which layer analytics should be added? Like Cloudflare browser insertion in the DNS level, Google Tag Manager via plugin, data layers. I'm not opposed to UTM.
Good question. I try to get Tag Manager. So it depends if you're using server side or not. I'm assuming not at this point because it's a little more complicated. But I would install Tag Manager as close to like the root source of the code as I can. So I know Cloudflare there's another thing that they have that's like Edge implementation that you can do some Tag Manager on it. That probably would work too. I forget what they're calling offhand, but it's a newer thing that they have. But But I would just put it like, I wouldn't use a plugin if I didn't have to. You can, like, there's a plugin called
Well, that's what you're saying
for WordPress. That is awesome.
It says
like
he likes to use Pixel My Site Pro, personal preference, tracking code manager, maybe.
Yep.
Molly's favorite. If you had a general rule for every WordPress site that you consulted on, is there a preference?
Yeah, I mean, for again, it depends what you're implementing. Pixel Site Pro will fire stuff into the different platforms, which is awesome. Pixel Site Pro cannot tell you if they looked at the pricing table for 4 seconds. Tag Manager can, right? So you need Tag Manager for that. It depends what the behaviors are you're trying to report back. So Pixel Site Pro, again, is really good for results-oriented behaviors going back and results goals being sent back to the platforms, but it is not good on the behaviors happening on the page or through the journey or recording any of that stuff. That's what Tag Manager in GA4 does. So I would install Tag Manager on the WordPress site. Again, you can either through the just the code of the pages, if you're comfortable doing that with Tag Manager anyway, or the plugin. You can use Google Tag Manager for WordPress, perfectly suitable plugin, good enough to get going. Eventually, I would still kind of code it into the theme to make it a little more robust. But that's what I would do. That's good enough to get going. Then Tag Manager can handle everything. Eventually you move to server side and then you don't need Pixel Site Pro, but that's layers of complexity. Don't worry about that now. That's just measurements of department, right? It's just, there's lots of different ways to do this. There isn't, and it's kind of the good and bad thing about measurement. There's not one way to do anything. There's like 14 ways to do anything. And that's the challenge, because there is not one way. It's hard to learn it. So that's why strategy is so important. So you understand how to cook, right? How to measure, and then you can pick and choose your tools that you need as you go.
Now, Michael had asked the question about having, all those sites, 100 some sites. So what he basically said here is many are self-contained funnels in the sales pages they drive traffic to, but then they later buy things from the main company site. And I think that you answered this in your answer. But does that complete everything? Does that kind of help tell the story?
Yeah. So again, the main site, it depends on the questions you're asking, right? This goes back to the measurement plan. That's why the measurement plan is so important. Because if you're not asking questions around, did site A or site B or site D that they eventually bought on site F, right? But if A, B, and C, do I want to know if A caused the sales or B caused the sales or C caused the sales? If I do want to know that, then I have to record that. So when the purchase happens, it says, oh, by the way, they originated on site A. Right? That's something you could do in GA4 if you wanted. You could do that in a UTM because you could pass that information over into the CRM potentially. Again, many ways to do this stuff. You could pass the information into the CRM. So when they became a lead on site A, that contact record said site A, and then you could merge field it. So when they buy, right? If you click on an email to go buy something, there's a little merge field that says, oh, by the way, I came from site A. That's what GA4 sees and says, oh yeah, they bought from site A. And you can tag them as a site A person, site A originated. There's lots of different ways to do it. So it's really hard to say, this is how you do it in a 15-second question, but know that it is possible many different ways to get something done. So that flexibility, which is what's really cool about this platform, because again, it's not a bug, it's a feature that it's so flexible. It allows you to do all this different stuff. And then that's why your plan is so important. That's why strategy is so important. Otherwise you end up you jump in so fast into trying to collect information and collect all the data that you're just like, oh, we're going to need this, so we collect it. And you don't really think through the how and the why. Then you end up with a bunch of data that you don't know what to do with because it's a bunch of ripped up pieces of paper because it wasn't organized properly, which is kind of the default for most people. So that's why I say really focus on the strategy, think through the questions, what actions will you take based on those questions? And if the action step, you're like, well, it doesn't matter. We don't really care if they came through site A, B, or C, that we're not going to change anything. Well, then why are you collecting the data in the first place? It's not an important question to know, at least not now. It might be a different question in the future that you come up with. A different version of that question might be useful, but maybe not now, right? So again, depends, but that's how I would think about it.
Great. So here's a question. I'm going to read you the whole question because you're going to understand this a lot more than I do. Okay. So for WordPress, do you have a preferred implementation of which? Oops, sorry, I read that one. Michael asked some really brilliant questions. I want to make sure I get all these from him. What's the budget? Got that. Hang on. GMB already killed a lot of the great data from
that was Google My Business.
SEO. Yep.
Yeah.
He also said he did not know that Google Tag Manager could tell the 5 seconds of looking versus PYSP. Yeah. Just knowing the action. Thanks for that. You guys are talking in code. I'm just repeating the words. You guys both know what's going on. I don't.
By the way, if you're using Tag Manager, it's the element visibility trigger that does that, Michael. So just so you can play around with it.
Again, you guys know what you're talking about, which is great. Michael has another great question. Again, I'm going to read the whole thing here. Okay. It's kind of a couple of questions in one, but I think you can answer it pretty quickly. How does GA4 handle attribution? So as an SEO agency, I run into retargeting guys consistently claiming credit for sales that were originally from finding our clients on SEO. Does the early, mid, late touch point section handle all that? And it sounds like, whoops, every time somebody types a question, it goes to the very bottom. So I got to scroll back up. Hang on one second. Where are we at? Does the early, late touch point section handle that? Number 4 sounds like the UTM links don't die with GA4. Am I reading that right?
So
I think there's
yeah,
two
so
questions there.
here's how GA4 handles attribution. You come into attribution settings, right? So remember, when you're setting up Google Analytics 4, I don't think there is a thing as a setup. It is 2 pieces. You create your accounts, properties, and data streams, and then you configure account, property, and data stream. When you configure it is when you go through and you do this. So the reporting model, this is the default that the reports will go to, typically last click, unless you do data-driven or whatever else. I don't like data-driven because that's a little too black box for me. I like to know how we figure stuff out. And I personally love last click, especially the way that we measure the results, because I've never, ever paid for an ad that was designed to get work done in 60 days from now. My ads are always like, you should be taking an action in the next few minutes of that ad. And I want to measure for that specific action. So last click works wonderfully for me. And I don't have a problem with attribution stuff. That said, this is where it is. So you can change your settings here. You can change your look back windows here. Remember, they want you to do the ad platform wants the longer window because they are more likely to be in that window. So they can more likely say, we helped with that, right? If they had a day here, I would do it. I like short windows because again, I don't personally run ads that are designed to work eventually over time. I have ads that are designed to get very specific steps of the customer journey. The trick is most organizations measure only the end of the customer journey. We measure all those steps. So I can tell where they are and I can see where it's breaking down. Most organizations don't have that. They just have beginning and end, and that's it. We have all the middle. So that's why it's important when you set up your results. So that's where that is. Now, going back to the question about attribution. So I'm just not a fan of attribution as a I'm going to call it a religion because I think it kind of is. It's like, it's one of those things like you just sort of have to have faith in that it's working, and it depends upon how you interpret it. That gives you your answer that you were trying to get to anyway. And it's like, well, if I'm the Facebook agency, I'm going to do first click all day long because that's better for me. If I'm the email person, I want to do last click because I want to show you the email is what caused it. And so anything that's like, well, depending on how you adjust it, you can get different answers. I already just don't really like. Because it's like that. It's just like, let me just, here's because it bias creeps in. I want the answer to be this. Let me flip this around until it's the answer. That said, they are all correctly useful versions of the truth. It's just that they're different versions of the truth. They're coming at it from different angles. So Facebook, as an example, like Ads Manager, will always claim credit for stuff because it doesn't have the access to the email and everything else. It just knows that pixel fired and it gets credit for it because it was in the look back window on the Facebook's Ads Manager platform. At the same time, Google Ads is claiming credit for the exact same thing. So does Outbrain and Taboola and whatever other TikTok now, right? They all start claiming credit for the same one sale. And that's where GA4 comes in because its job is to sit there and say, okay, well, here's kind of where they were in the journey. And that's where it sort of says, these are the ones that sort of lean more toward influencing this specific conversion. Here are the ones that more cause or can more directly impact and make happen this specific conversion. And that's why when you're looking at this particular report, pick a conversion, right? But if you look at the one that we have, I can say, okay, what completed the journey, what engaged the journey, what made them aware of the journey in the first place, right? So I can just kind of pull up all my different things here. So I can say which traffic sources are good at awareness, which are good at engagement, which are good at completing the deal. And then I can start to realize they have superpowers. They have little personalities. And then I point maybe Google Organic to making people aware because it's really good. So I create organic content just to get people aware. That recycles into a retargeting audience. It goes into Facebook to get them to become a lead. And then all of a sudden my email kicks in and I can measure to say, because that's how my marketing is supposed to work, because my forecast, is it working that way? And I can prove that is or is not through reports like this. So that's just some examples of how I think about it.
So just wrap up one of Michael's thoughts here. He says, hey, I'm signing up, Chris. You know your stuff. I've been dying for this without going through a stupid Google course. Thanks for putting this together. Rarely are webinars valuable. I really learned a lot on this.
Dude, that rocks. Thank you for that. There's the testimonial of the day right there.
There we go. Now, I think I have just 2 more questions in here, but I want to make sure I get everyone's questions answered. Still a lot of people on the line. Recording. Yep, you got that out. We got the Google Analytics.
One thing I saw that Michael had asked in that same question you were looking at was around UTMs. They do not die. No, UTMs are continuing and there's more. So there is actually now 7 different UTMs that'll start using. But again, this is why measurement's a department, not an organization. So I'm going to say UTMs and GA4. When you come in here, so this is the parameters. So you have UTM ID, that's new. UTM source, medium, and campaign, you're probably familiar with. Source platform is new. term was around, content was around, but look at these: UTM creative format, the type of creative, UTM marketing traffic, right? What's it for? Remarketing or prospecting. So Google has been listening to how people are using UTMs. And we used to say, put them all in the content section. Well, now they're saying, let's just break it out in a separate UTM. But notice it's new, just not currently available in GA4 properties. So there are ways that you can get it in there. And that's why measurement's a department, because this is not currently available in GA4 from a reporting perspective, but it will be. So if you know about this sort of stuff, you can start getting it in there. You can light it up manually for now. And then eventually when it becomes its own report, you'll have them all in there. So UTMs are super useful, and they're getting better at being a little more granular. So you can get that. So I want to make sure that you saw that.
Phil just made a mention in here as well too. Absolutely signing up for this. 100% see the connection between the belt method, in Fight Club and using the data. Super pumped about the granularity of GA4 to be better to build out funnels in the belt across Google and Meta. So thank you very much for that.
Awesome. Thank you,
That's from Phil.
Look forward to seeing you there.
We have another question from, I want to make sure I enunciate this right. Again, I am a white kid from Nebraska that knows very little about enunciation from other names outside of Frank and Sam. So I believe it's Abadu. Sal, what's your opinion? And I'd love to hear this. I think I know the answer to this question, but I want to hear your opinion. What's your opinion? Should I install? Because remember, he is just starting out. He's the affiliate that's just kind of starting out with the website. Should he put the pixel in manually on the site? Maybe use or pixel my site or use Tag Manager? What's basically going to be the easiest thing that he can install that won't affect the overall site speed, since we know that's a huge deal with running paid traffic these days?
Right. So, and there is, like, every script you put on the page affects load speed, right? However, it's like, is it worth that half a millisecond delay for the payoff that you get? I would suggest measurement is 1,000 times worth it, right? So I wouldn't worry too much about that. However, how do you do it? Well, that's where you come into, this is where I think about in systems theory, right? So I'm a big systems guy. If you should always, every system wants to grow complex. Everybody who's ever tried to do any sort of project management, you realize how complex it gets so quickly, because systems want to explode. They want to be complex. It's easy to make things complex. It is hard to keep things simple. That is a skill. So think about Steve Jobs and that one button. It's hard to do that. It's easy to have 45 buttons on a little phone, right? It's hard to make it simple. So what I would do if I'm just starting out is I would be like, what is the simplest possible way I can do this that requires that will get me the furthest I can with the least amount of effort? Given those options, Pixel Site Pro, got to learn that. Tag Manager, got to learn that. Code, don't have to learn that because it's the platform I went anyway. I would do the code, but that's why. That's how I'm arriving at that answer. So I would come in here and I would grab in the data stream. Once you set it up, it'll dump it this anyway. You grab your data stream and then go to your tag configuration settings. Let me go back here, tag configuration settings, and then you just grab your code, paste this into your site, or you could use a plugin. Again, plugins all of a sudden get a little heavier, and sometimes plugins do extra. Like, I like Monster Insights, I like the team over Monster Insights, but sometimes they have caused problems for some of our students because they start automatically reporting events to be helpful, which I get, but they are screwing up their installations and that without realizing it. So I try to stay away from plugins to install this stuff if it's like a WordPress site. If it's like a Shopify store and they have an integration, which of course Shopify will in March, as we talked about, then I would use their integration. I would just be like, cool, create your data stream, give them the number, what they call the measurement ID, and then you're off to the races. So when you think through, how do I do something? Typically, that's what I would do. What is the simplest possible way that takes the least amount of resources that will get me moving the fastest, get me progress? And even if it's a little bit of progress, it's still progress and you just gain some muscle. And then when you come back, eventually you will go into something like Tag Manager, I think, because it does amazing things that can allow you to create some really cool looking reports. So that's how I would do it. And that's how I think. I want to sort of teach you how I'm thinking about it too, to arrive at that answer.
Somebody had asked, what's the subject of the Google email? Sorry to ask. So I think this is really important, actually, because the interesting thing is you never know who sets up your Google Analytics, right? If you had somebody set up your Google Analytics 3 or 4 years ago, and you don't really check that email that you used to use, like I used to set up a lot of stuff on my AOL email. I never even checked that. So Google can send me updates all day long, and I'd have no idea that any of this is happening. So I think this is a really great and simplistic question. If you have an ad agency and you are working with clients, have them go search for their email either in spam. And
all I did was
the headlines
search on
basically
Wheel,
this.
and it popped up. Yeah, and this is the email.
Yeah, you can type in Google Analytics. It's going to be sent from Google Analytics. You can look that up, and then it's basically going to say, what should you do before Universal Analytics sunsets in 2023? I think if they just do a search for Google Analytics, it will pull up all of these warning emails, and then you can show the client that, hey, this is really important. We have to make some changes because whatever we do not want to make sure that automatic update happens.
Exactly right. And this learn more button goes into the details that then shows you what we talked about before with all that same page I was walking through before. It shows you all the stuff they're about to do to hack it apart. And this is basically like, I go to that mom example. This is mom saying, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to throw out your favorite toys. I'm going to take this other one. I'm going to break it into a bunch of pieces. And I'm going to hide it all over the place. And then I'm going to make it your problem. Like that's what they're doing. And again, I get it because I honestly don't think they have a choice. And I think they're getting frustrated. They're just like, okay. Yeah. Like they are just the parent getting frustrated with the dirty room, being like, all right, we're moving everybody. Like this is what we're going to do. So, but don't let this happen to you. So will be my.
So Sue has a follow-up here too, which I think is really interesting. I think there's maybe 2 more questions left, and then that is it. This is great, by the way. Everyone who is still attending the call is still on here. These are really, really, really good. I may have missed this, but at the top of the hour, at about the 2 o'clock hour, Sue says, wow, only keeps data for 14 months. I think I missed that. What only keeps data for 14 months?
Oh, Kurt was not paying attention.
I think I sneezed.
Mr. Molly. All right, here we go.
Yep.
So where that was in the data settings, right? So in data settings, you determine how the data is collected, right? So we typically will use Google Signals. You don't have to. It's entirely what's up to your compliance policy against compliance thing, but it's Google sharing everything. One of the other things they have is retention. By default, it's 2 months.
What?
So that's the important part. Now, this is a scary term. He's like, oh my God, they're losing. They only keep the data for 2 months. It's true. They only keep some data for 2 months. The specific user data is what they are doing here. So what this is, and you can click on the learn more button here to go into the details of it, but it's very specific identifiers that identify a user anonymously. It's not personally identifiable information because you cannot put that in Google anyway, but all these little codes that know it was a Google ad that came through and all the other stuff that's being collected that Google knows, they kind of throw out. And now it's just aggregate data. You'll know there was a page view, but it will no longer be associated to a certain person, just a general class called like users. And so it gets aggregated. So you're not losing. It's not like after 2 months, if you kept it here, it's not like if you went back 2 months, there'll be no data there. There will be data. It just won't be as detailed because all those details have been sort of been scrubbed out, which is why, again, if it makes sense for your policies to switch it to the longest, because in Universal, it was like 4 years, something like that, 5 years you could do. So many, many months. Now that's gone. And that's a huge change for people. They don't realize that's back here. And they haven't, if they haven't learned how to use Google Analytics 4, you probably never came across this setting. It just lit up. You put the code on the page, you have a bunch of data, and you try to figure out how to use it. That's a huge mistake. You got to learn how to create and configure the account. That configuration is what's stitching together all those little puzzle pieces. So now when you look at it, it's actually a put together puzzle, not a bunch of ripped up pieces of paper. Right. So that's where this is. So just, I would, if you can, if it makes sense for your brand, I would say go the longer possible way. But this is where other tools are coming in, like BigQuery, because you can get everything into a database and you back everything up in BigQuery. That way you don't lose anything. But again, that's a whole other platform. Measurement's a department, not a project anymore. Right. So companies are leveling up because they have to, because data can't be kept by Google anymore. It's illegal. That's the thing. It's not like they don't want to. They absolutely want it.
Can't.
It's illegal. They're getting fined. Look what happened to Facebook. Talked about $400 million fine, right?
It's exactly what we talked about on our last call when we did this inside for Fight Club. But it's like, it's kind of funny because these huge companies are paying these fines, which they'll just be able to write a check for it. But it's happening over and over and over. It's not the first time that Google or Facebook has paid for violating information. I mean, within hundreds of millions of dollars. So let's talk about this kind of as a crapshoot. I think Sue asked a really good question here as well, too. So with Shopify integration, they kind of force you to integrate. So what if you already set this all up? Is there going to be any damage that's done with you've already set yours up and then they're going to force you to do the integration? So any overriding setup?
Yeah, really good question. So with Shopify in particular, now I'm going to speak from universal experience there because I don't know what their GA4 setup's going to do. Nobody does, right? Until they release it to the world. However, with universal, their integration was pretty decent. So I could go in there, put in my little UA account, property ID, and e-commerce came through. Everything came through in the way I wanted it to. However, I could not see things like, well, did they click on the images? Did they watch my demonstration video? Did they view did they look at the reviews and testimonials for at least 5 seconds? Did they scroll down? I couldn't see that because Shopify wasn't sending that over, right? They were doing the e-commerce stuff just fine. They were doing things like begin checkout and all that stuff, which was great. but they were not great for the on-page behaviors that I was now asking questions on, because I've got more measurement muscle and I'm asking those questions, right, at this point. So what we do is we put Tag Manager on top of it as a layer, and then Tag Manager does not report e-commerce. It just reports all those on-site behaviors on top of their existing integration. So my guess, I'm totally guessing, that's probably what will happen with the GA4. GA4 is going to have generic behaviors, because think about it from Shopify's standpoint. They have no idea. They're just measuring e-commerce stores. They have to be really generic on what they're pushing in, because it's got to apply to everybody, right, equally. But you as a company or as a business model or your particular brand you're going to ask very specific questions that only you are asking. That's where Tag Manager sits on top of it. All those behaviors get sent into GA4 from Tag Manager. Meanwhile, Shopify is sending all those generic e-commerce events, and they're all married in the GA4 platform. Because at the end of the day, GA4 doesn't care where it gets the information from. It just will stitch it all together in the one spot. So that's how I would think that it's going to work with them as well.
So it looks like Michael just bailed on us, one of the Michaels, but he basically just says, hey, I got to run, but I'm going to sign up. Thanks, nice. Molly and Chris. Incredible value here. Rare for webinars anymore. Time very, very well spent. So
outstanding. Thank you, Michael, for the win. Looking forward to seeing you back there. Yep.
Somebody had mentioned in here as well, too, and unfortunately I deleted the question in here because we'd already gone over it. But they said that they see how this works really well, obviously, for the Belt Method and Fight Club. I think, Nick, this may be mandatory viewing for anybody who's inside of the Belt Method. The reason is because it's interesting, because with the Belt Method, right, we're doing a lot of video views, and a lot of people, like when we're talking about, Chris, you've been to some of my parties at Traffic and Conversion where we have like the CEO of Wicked Reports, right? And Wicked Reports is only attributes last click. That's it. So if we're running a bunch of video views, it doesn't account for any of that. What I tell people all the time is I'm like, look, if you're going to use something like one of these reporting tools that is only judging on last click, you have to start taking a look before you start. What is the non-attributed search? Because you're going to see all these branding plays go on. But what I see from you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, GA4 is going to help answer a lot of these questions, because what you teach is the customer journey. There's a discovery phase and a budget that should be there. You're going to start thinking about the traffic that comes in. There's an engagement before all that stuff starts to happen and lead. Do you see that I know that the cookies are changing, but do you see GA4 being a lot more granular and working along with a lot of these warm-up processes versus just straight up direct response marketing?
Oh yeah, 100%. Because of that, because it's a directional tool. It's a tool to understand the behaviors that are happening on the page. Remember, we're listening to the conversation that our website is having with our users. Just like if you had a offline store, some brick and mortar store, and a salesperson walked up to to a customer. If you're the manager, you want to understand what's going on, especially if it's a new salesperson. You want to make sure they're having a good conversation with that customer. It's the same thing with our websites. We got to make sure our stores, our e-commerce stores, our direct response, whatever the business model is, if it's digital marketing, it's having a conversation with the users, and not knowing what that conversation is dangerous, because then you're constantly guessing as to what needs to change. And that's super inefficient at best, right? Worst case, and I'll tell you, this is even the worst case. You and I have talked to this before. You have the curse of a good offer, which is you guess correctly. And now it just works and it explodes, and you start throwing money at it, and it just, the eyeballs turn into money, and this is awesome. And you keep putting more money and raising those budgets. And all of a sudden you're spending $10,000 a day. And then one day Facebook keeps it all and you don't get the results. And you go, what happened? And then you're like, and everyone's like, I don't know, because nobody cared, because as long as they were making money, who cares? That's the most dangerous thought I've ever heard an entrepreneur say. And so when that happens, you will absolutely care, and it'll be too late, because now you're spending $10,000 a day, you're hemorrhaging cash, you're not getting any results, and you have no clue how anything was working because you ignored that conversation the entire time. So GA4 is an incredible tool for the directional behavior as you're moving somebody through a journey. And of course, that includes ultimately the one we all care about, which is that end result of a purchase, typically for a lot of individuals. But huge tool, because it's the only thing that's got visibility in all the different platforms.
And I think this may be the last question, maybe. Travis, I see that you have your hand up, and I know sometimes when I'm on webinars, I want to make sure that they're live, so I just start hitting a bunch of buttons to see if anybody replies back to me. But I don't see that you have a question inside the Q&A or inside the chat. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them in there. Happy to answer your question. If you accidentally hit the hand up, totally understand. I like to do that again just to make sure that these things are live. Mercer, we've been at this for 2 hours. I know that your time is really valuable, especially on a Thursday. If I don't see any questions pop up here in the next 30 seconds, anything you want to do to kind of wrap up? We have all the links that are in here for the free tools, and just jump right on into your courses as well too. any kind of parting words that you have? This has been really good. And again, in my opinion, this is going to be mandatory. Anybody who joins the Belt Method, which is the Fight Club, to make sure that they're watching this content. And by the way, Emery says this as well too. Thank you both.
Nice.
This has really been great. Seriously. So any other final thoughts from Mercer?
Just there is a lot to this. I don't want to. I'm not a big flash guy. You know that. Like, the worst part about me is my marketing skill. Like, I'm not that guy. I'm not hypey. But I will say, like, give yourself permission to get good enough to get going with this. There is a lot to it, and that's just okay. It's okay to be like, yeah, there's a lot. It is overwhelming. It is. And let's get started. And just start with something. So if we can help you with that by you jumping in the course, I would think that's the easiest thing personally. Jump in that course, you'll get the framework, you'll start to understand some of the thinking back there. And then at that point, you can go watch some of the YouTube trainings that we have and learn some things and practice. Every step you take, every minute, and this is how I would think about it at the beginning, every minute I take to learn something builds a tiny bit of muscle. But that muscle stays with you forever as long as you keep practicing. So every time you keep coming back, you come back better and better and better. After a month, you look back and you're like, wow, I think differently now. Like, this is great. After 2 months, you're like, okay, I'm starting to get the hang of this. After 3 months, you're like, I got this. And after 4 months, you're like, let's bring on Tag Manager now. And then now you're in measurement, right? So just give yourself that permission to not be perfect. Don't try to do what we're doing. We have a ton of muscle. You don't want to try to do what we're doing, not yet. But we were exactly where you are. So we're kind of a version of you in the future is how I would look at it. So just go like, hey, they also started doing this, and just get good enough to get going. Give yourself permission to be okay with where you're at and just practice stuff. Ask for help where you can. And then just one step at a time, it starts building. And before you know it, you got some serious results and some really good muscle behind you.
Maria also wants to say thank you. This is awesome stuff. And Hannah, just to answer your question, it's always good to see you here. Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome for all the information. We're going to go ahead and the starting links is really the free tools that you want to check out that you can see right here over in the chat. It's the belt.live/free tools. And then also we are going to send out the replay. Truth be told, this isn't like a typical webinar where it's just like, hey, we're going to hype it up, and at the very 45 or 50 minute mark say, buy right now. You have until Monday to buy. Otherwise, it's going away. Yeah. What Mercer and I decided to do is, hey, let's record 2 webinars this year. Let's record one right now to get people acclimated with the most up-to-date information and get them working on this right now. Now, when a bunch of the updates actually happen, once July hits, it's again kind of like Facebook CAPI. I mean, that's what I can relate most to it, right? Or Y2K. It's like the buildup of it is everyone's like, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? And then right before, there's a whole lot of solutions that happen. And then when it actually was implemented, it wasn't actually that hard. Well, in July, we're going to record another webinar with all the updates. So Hannah, just to be clear, we're going to send out the replay, but it's not something that you literally have tomorrow. You must sign up or the price changes. We're going to keep the prices the same and everything else. You are welcome in anytime that you want. At the end of the day, it's kind of like this. It's a survival tool, especially for marketing. So you don't have to eat, right, to lose weight. You don't have to eat at all. But within 5 to 7 to 10 days, the body starts to shut down. So we're not saying, hey, this is a really low price for you to jump in right now. It's just a critical time for your business to make sure that you do jump in right now, these the tracking metrics, and especially in a GA4 like we were talking about here. So we'll leave the replay up for a while. You'll see that in the back, especially if you're a member of the Fight Club. We'll get this out to the public. I'm going to be running some traffic to it because it's really important. And I'm going to be using GA4 to track a lot of this stuff as well, too. Last thing is, it says, thank you. Yes, wanting to make time to start learning a lot of these free tools you're sharing, so that you can start to accelerate things. Absolutely, Hannah. Absolutely. Mercer, thank you very much for being here. I mean, we still got a bunch of people left over at the 2 hour mark, almost 2.5 hours, which is
pretty good. I love
projects,
this.
Right?
This is great. It's a great group. Thank you all for participating and asking questions too, because the more you ask about this, your brains are literally engaging with the content, which is how you learn it. So that's awesome that everyone's doing that. Appreciate it.
Whew. Thank you, Mercer. You're amazing, man. I appreciate you. I love you. We will have beers again soon, and I know I will see you downtown here shortly. The Internet Marketing Party again next month.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, y'all.
See you, everybody. Take care. Thanks, everyone. All right, bye.